All right, I'm calling to order the November 19th, 2018 Planning Commission meeting. Mrs. Aruzi, can you take the roll?
Ms. Huckleberry? Here. Mr. Krasner? Mr. Krasner is absent. Mr. Fuentes? Here. Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Rankin?
Here.
Ms. Dietz?
Here.
Mr. Rudiska?
Here.
Thank you.
All right. Can I get a motion to adopt this evening's agenda?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, terrific. We have a full agenda this evening, the thing that we just adopted. We're going to start with our speaker series where we hear from Julie Herlins about the fiscal impact model. And then we have lots of items. As I mentioned before we started the meeting, I'm going to step out for about 45 minutes to go to the city council meeting, but we should continue on. I think I will be back in time for the library variance, which should be an interesting discussion, and then I think the majority of the time this evening is going to be on the George Mason High School site plan. So without further ado, Mrs. Herlins, please. Yes.
And green means go, okay. Paul, did you want to say anything by way of introduction first?
Yeah, just
or-
a couple things. So Julie Herlins, for the benefits of the Planning Commission, Julie Herlins is here to talk to you all tonight as part of your ongoing speaker series. I think as we've discussed before, the idea behind the speaker series is to bring new information or updated information to the Planning Commission, preferably outside the scope of any sort of project that allows for broader, less stressful conversation. This also has the benefit of being done at the Planning Commission meetings, which are of course recorded and shared with the public. So the idea is that not only are we talking and getting the latest information to the Planning Commission members, we're also getting information out to the entire community. Ms. Herlins works as a principal with Tischler Weiss. They're a company that does fiscal impact modeling as well as a range of other services, and they work throughout the country. Tischler Weiss has been maintaining and updating the city's fiscal impact model, which is used as part of the decision-making process, but it's of course not the only part of the decision-making process for new development proposals throughout the city's commercial corridors. With that, I want to turn it over to Julie.
Great. Thank you, Paul. It's good to be with you this evening. We did a similar presentation with the Economic Development Commission, I think it was last year around the same time, so this is kind of a continuation of a series of presentations on the model. We have just completed an update, a refresh to the model, so this is a good time to come back and talk about it. Paul mentioned our firm. I'm with the firm Tischler Weiss. We're based in Bethesda, Maryland, although it's not all the way in downtown Bethesda. But we work nationally. The map up there shows our clients, not our offices. So we work nationally. We do a lot of work in Virginia. I actually live in Fairfax County, Greenway Down, so right over the border of from the City Falls Church. So somewhat local, and happy to be able to do this kind of work and come to this evening meeting, which is pretty manageable travel from my perspective. But we do, in places outside of Virginia, we do, one of our core services is impact fees. And in Virginia, it's the analogous tool is cash proffers. Lots of changes have gone on over recently with the cash proffer legislation. So we work with a lot of communities in Virginia on their cash proffer policies and doing some models to help to evaluate cash proffer amounts and negotiations, but in other places around the country, we do impact fee work, impact fee studies, as well as fiscal impact analysis everywhere else too, including within Virginia. So in terms of the Falls Church model, we have been working with the city for a long time now, almost really since the early 2000s, and we have continually made improvements and updates to the model over the years. So the foundational purposes of the model, and Paul mentioned this, it is one tool in the decision-making process of determining the direct fiscal impacts, the direct revenues and expenditures to serve a particular development proposal. So it is used on a case-by-case basis for specific development projects. It is intended to be able to, or the capacity to compare a range of assumptions about a particular project, to compare and contrast different factors regarding a project. To look at the direct revenues, the direct expenditures, to serve a specific project, and really it comes down to sort of the key question about, are the revenues that are generated by the development, by the growth, by this particular project enough to cover the resulting service and facility demands off of that project? It is, and we talk about fiscal impact analysis, it's direct. It's the city's revenues, the city's expenditures, not the spin-off, and I'll talk just briefly about that in a moment. And so it's really quite simple in terms of the formula. It's what are the revenues generated from the project minus the expenditures, is there a net surplus or a net deficit? And it is, and the base assumption is current levels of service. So what is included in, funded in the city's budget today, that's the basis. So it's city general fund and city schools and the schools' expenditures. And that's the starting point. It's not a higher level of service, not a lower level of service. It is current levels of service. And part of another sort of objective or a purpose of a fiscal impact analysis is to identify that there are contributors and recipients in a community, that some land uses, it's all land use driven, that some land uses are going to generate more revenues than costs, and some are going to generate more costs than expenditures, and a community is made up of all of those different component parts, and that's what makes a community, and that there's not necessarily, you're not in the business city's not in the business of making a profit, you're in the business of providing services, and some are going to generate sufficient revenues to offset the cost for other types of land uses. And really, again, a sort of a foundational purpose is to help the city to meet planning and fiscal goals, to really get to the basis of that understanding between the connection of land uses and fiscal conditions, to help as a tool, one tool and a broader array of tools to help make decisions about land uses, policies, component parts of projects. And we do find, as we're working in lots of different places around the country, it sort of leads to that question about who should pay for what. You know, who is responsible? Who should the private sector should they provide improvements to roadways, to sidewalks, to project level plus system level improvements because they're causing the need for additional services or additional infrastructure. And then is that a worthwhile pursuit? To pursue that contribution versus the public maybe incentivizing those improvements to help a development along. So this differs, I mentioned briefly, a difference from an economic impact analysis really does get into that spin-off type of an effect, where we talk about residential development, there's construction impacts, there's other ancillary impacts that are generated from residential spending. So those are non-direct, those are spin-off. That's not what this model does. The model is specific to a residential unit. What are the revenues and costs off of that unit? Retail, office, et cetera, those direct impacts. A lot of times with economic impacts, you're not going to necessarily follow the jurisdictional line, particularly here in Falls Church. I live in Fairfax County, spend a lot of my dollars in the city of Falls Church, and vice versa. Yes, you're welcome. And vice versa. And so as you get smaller and smaller with a smaller unit of boundary, those economic benefits are going to spill over into neighboring jurisdictions. And so oftentimes, though, you might get a fiscal and economic impact analysis from a developer that then includes those extra spin-off benefits. Again, our model is specific to the fiscal. It does not include the economic impact, although we've talked about it over the years and have the capability of doing that if that was something that the city wanted to go in that direction in the future. It's also different from municipal budgeting. That's a revenue-constrained exercise where you have a certain amount of revenue, you're going to fund your expenditures, your operating and capital expenditures within those constraints, the revenue constraints. A fiscal impact analysis models both of those elements separately. Models projects revenues off of the land use, the expenditures to serve, and then compares the two at the end of the day. So it is very different from municipal budgeting. It is not a budgeting tool. It is not a financial model to be used as part of the budgeting process. Again, if that was a question that the city was interested in pursuing, the model can be, we can build a model to do that, but it was not built specifically for that purpose. So in terms of the specific model for the City of Falls Church, again, when I talk about current levels of service, it's the budget, the current budget. So we've updated this model to the fiscal 19 budget, I believe. So the next adopted budget, and that reflects current levels of service. So current levels of services, essentially the costs to provide services in all of the departments, all the general fund departments within the city. We also, as part of the process, not for this refresh, but prior to with the last full update, we go and talk with all the departments, with all the city departments, and talk about their current services, what drives the need for hiring new staff, what drives the needs for their operating costs, the capital side of the equation in terms of their non-fixed assets. So we have a better understanding, we have a real understanding of what those drivers are from the city's perspective. And really the question becomes, in terms of new residents, new businesses, what drives those services, what is really pushing their need for, or their a need for, again, to hire new staff or to increase their operating costs. The characteristics of new development are key drivers in the model. So property values, key element, one of the most, and probably the most important, obviously from a revenue perspective, because property tax is your number one revenue source. Sales per square foot for retail uses, BPOL and BPP, that's business and professional licensing, and business personal property tax as well. So those are included in the model from a revenue perspective. And then on the demand side, household size, how many people occupy a residential unit, and that varies by type of residential unit. The student generation rates, again, that varies by type of residential unit. Employees per square foot varies by retail, office, industrial, and vehicle trips we use to model costs as well. The model itself is, it's all open. It's developed in Excel, Microsoft Excel. I work in PC. That's why I didn't know what to do with the Mac when it came up. But it's all in a PC model. And we add a little bit of just some coding and some Visual Basic just for user ease. But it is all open, so there's really not a black box concern. It's not you punch in a number and then out spits the results. You can, as the user here locally at the city, can look through all of the formulas throughout. It is a proprietary model. It is our line of business, and so it's not meant to be shared external to the jurisdiction, but it is open and can be looked at. We have the models have the capability. This model has the capability of analyzing up to 3 scenarios at a time. The way that it's been utilized here is pretty much at a development project by development project, sort of one set of assumptions, and then some alterations to those assumptions. It can be. But the model can be utilized in a way that takes that one scenario and modifies it slightly within the same model. It's that sort of a sidebar, if you will. It doesn't functionality. You can do one at a time, and it does the same thing. Because it's developed in Excel and we've developed it, we can add additional modules, which we have over the years. We've made some changes in the last few updates, adding in vehicle costs, so non-fixed assets to add as an additional operating cost that has been added in, and again has the capability we can add as different questions come up. We can add those in. I've talked about our involvement and our role. We have frequently updated. Those are the years that we've updated the model, and provide ongoing technical assistance. I'm phone call or email away from assistance. For this update, we've updated the revenue factors, those base year assumptions in terms of property values, and we have default values that are established in the model, but those can all be user input as well. So if they can be tested in terms of different property values, different student generation rates, which I know is a frequently tested variable, household sizes, those kinds of things. We did modify the approach on the school operating cost. The prior iterations of the model was, and this is just in case you start to really look at those numbers closely in terms of the bottom line. We previously had been the full cost, so with state and federal funding and local funding as the cost per student. And so the modification this time is for local cost per student. That becomes an input as opposed to a calculation as part of the model. This latest go-round, there was some reorganization of city departments, so that's included in the model. Again, we have updated and included vehicle and capital costs, and just some tweaks and improvements for the user, both on the input side and on the output side as well. This is not meant to see the specifics, but just sort of a bird's eye view of what the input, what some of the pages look like in the model. So pretty straightforward in terms of the inputs. It's a matter of basically the yellow cells on the left is really the minimum amount of inputs that would need to happen in the model in terms of numbers of units. And then all of the stuff to the right are things that are either default values that can be left in there or overridden when you have different set of assumptions. And the default values, again, are averages that are based on updated and current information. And then the different modules through the model on the revenue side, again, not meant to see the specifics, it's just that the current budget is entered, there's a projection methodology, and updates on rates and percentages reflective of the current tax rates and retail sales tax rate. And then there's the cost side, same thing. Base year budget's entered. There's a projection methodology, and that one of the key approaches for our fiscal impact analysis and for our approach is that not every cost is assumed to be affected by growth or development, particularly in a place that's built out. And so, for example, the police department, really on the personnel side, you're not going to hire a new chief, you're not going to hire new deputies, you're going to really the real impact on the personnel side is going to be patrol officers. And that's where the cost comes in on the personnel side. So it's pretty much, most of it is fixed, most of the personnel costs are fixed, and it's really that pinpoint place in the personnel roster where those costs are affected. And then other operating costs are affected as well. And then in terms of outputs and summaries, again, the model is sort of set up to have a snapshot in terms of results. This is a hypothetical entry on my part that it sort of, it provides an output of what's the total market value, what's the revenue generated, how many students are generated under our set of assumptions, what's the cost per student, which is a question that is frequently asked, how many residential units, what's the square footage of non-residential space, et cetera, et cetera. And this has been something that we've changed over the years too, based on the feedback that economic development staff has gotten in terms of what's important, what folks want to see in terms of the reporting out, and the questions they've gotten, quite frankly. And then, but at the same time, there's much more detail output that can be provided if there are specific questions about, well, what's included in, what does that revenue number include? How much, what kind of revenue generation, not only from the property tax line item, but everything else? What about on the operating cost side? How much on the general, on the general government versus public safety, those kinds of things. And so those answers are there if the questions come up. I should also say too, and what you're seeing here, the point I was making in terms of a stabilized year, it's the model results are reported out as year 2, essentially. It's basically it's assumed full occupancy, so it's entered, the project's entered. The year 1 has some additional revenues that are one-time revenues, particularly on the planning side, the building permit side, and then we're reporting out at that year 2. The model does have the capability of doing a multi-year and phased approach. hasn't been utilized in that way yet, but again, it's not really been the questions that have been asked. And so that can be modified in the future if those questions do come up. We do lots of work in places with, potentially alternative scenarios of timing. What happens if if a project builds out slower versus faster, et cetera, et cetera. But this has been, again, the main question has been, what's the bottom line? When this is fully built and fully occupied, where do we end up when it's stabilized? And so at this point, it's identified as our second year. And this is how the model has been used. That's one of the points about it. It's basically assumes that it's built out, 100% occupied. What is the ongoing revenue potential? What's the costs? Again, it's been really what's the operating impact? Been used on what's the operating impact from development proposals? Again, based on current levels of service. We haven't tested changes of those levels of service. Multiple scenarios have been tested, and that vary the type and mix of land uses, student generation rates, and property and retail sales value. And then again, at the 100% occupancy. We've included also sort of how the model has not been used. We've gotten some questions over the years on the capital side, and that connection between proffer policy and cash proffers. The capital impacts for capacity needs have, in this case, in the city, been assumed to be handled by what's already in the ground today in terms of fixed assets, and that there really has been minimal other non-school, locally funded capacity projects in the CIP, and so those have been sort of handled separately, and that the existing proffer policy has really handled those impacts separate from the operating impact. And that there has been cash proffers and in-kind contributions for capacity needs that are negotiated and collected based on project by project specifications. And in that one handout, there is that column that the city reports out, or the economic development reports out, on the proffers that have been provided over the years, project by project. This is the point we were talking about earlier. I mentioned that the model has not been used to project or to identify what those contributing impacts are, the economic impacts, the spin-off, but its potential in terms of the value, the inherent value kind of captured in that increase in the property values. It has not been used in terms of long-term trends or a cumulative basis, but it's interesting, though, in terms of the testing, what's happened here in terms of testing of different student generation rates and the tracking of student generation rates here. The data in the city is very good and very sound. And so in terms of identifying what those long-term trends are, using the existing data, using the data that you have at hand is actually, in effect, tracking those long-term trends. As we've seen over now, you have a decent sample size, a pretty decent amount of time of history in terms of the mixed-use projects. And so that's all kind of worked into these updates as we go forward. Model continues to evolve. As I mentioned, we've made changes over the years. There has been continuing talk about identifying capital impacts and capital projects as the city hall happens, as the library, as the school. Those projects that occur, those can be incorporated in. Again, they're sort of handled through the proffer policy and through proffer separately, but those can be quite easily captured within the model. And we've been identifying and, again, tracking revenue trends through our updated default values in terms of the changing character of retail in the city and the transition of certain types of uses from bricks and mortar retail to service-oriented retail, and what that does in terms of the revenue profile coming off of those land uses. So that continues to evolve and improve. So in conclusion, and to wrap up, the model here has been deployed very consistently over time. It has been used in a similar fashion year over year over year, and as evidence as the track record with that summary that economic development puts together. And again, the questions that are asked drive the model design, and it has influenced where we've gone with the model and how it's changed. And as those questions change, I expect the model to change as well, and have the capability to be able to do that. And then, as we kind of come full circle in terms of the other factors to be considered, that there are other. My firm, very focused and keyed in on fiscal conditions and using a fiscal tool as a connection to with land use decisions, but there are obviously many other factors to consider when making land use decisions and policies. But this, we feel brings that a level of information that some other places, quite frankly, don't utilize, and is helpful in terms of helping to make those decisions as you go forward. I'm happy to answer any questions and any discussion.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions. This has been a really foundational element of our decision-making on the Planning Commission, and also I know the City Council uses it greatly in other committees that we've served on. This is sort of the foundation to what helps us. As you said, it's just one of many variables. But it's often, while not presented as a black box, we just sort of get the information output. And this is the first time I've seen this sort of fiscal impact report. And so I'm just sort of scanning it quickly because I hadn't been provided it, I don't think, prior to this meeting. It was just up here. I'm going to quickly turn it over to the rest of the commission here, but can you help me understand, I guess, sort of as a scorecard to how it's performed? It looks like this is what this is, but I don't see the variances, or I haven't seen how it's done over time, sort of isolated in a specific column. So let me ask the general question before you get into like the very specifics. How has it performed over time? Has it done a good job of projecting in the near term or in the long term? Is there certain developments or types of development that it does better at than others? I mean, is it mixed use? It really hits it on the head, or is it just all commercial? So just some. You don't need to go line by line. Here's what I'm saying. Just in general, how do you think it's performed to? Because we've used it as a tool, and are we using the right tool?
Right. No, that's a good question. And I should say first that this matrix, and there's a one-pager that goes along with it, that this is produced by the Economic Development Department, right? It's not through your office, right? It's just so it's Economic Development Department. So this is use of our model and the Economic Development Department putting this together. But it is striking, and we get asked this question a lot in a lot of other communities, and not everybody does this, which is really good, and we appreciate it, because then we can look back and say, well, we have this one client in Falls Church that tracks everything and does this. So it given so it's one of the challenges is it is a fiscal model that's updated for the current budget. And so one of the things that's pointed out in here is with the tax rate, that the tax rate has changed over time. And so there's a snapshot in time where you're identifying, what projected revenues are under a set of assumptions with the tax rate, and then what the actuals are. So that's going to be potentially different because the rates are going to change. But it's been relatively close, and I'll talk about one of the factors contributing to some of the differences on the revenue. But on the demand side, it's been very close on the student generation. I think, one largest expense here, your school's operating costs. It's been very close on the student generation rate, with the one exception of the Pearson building, which has been the exception that has been pointed out because of the change in the use and because of the size of the units in the building. And that is the key determinant here and elsewhere of the number of students that you're going to get in your residential units is bedroom size, how many bedrooms. That's going to drive the number of kids that come off of those units. And that's pretty much, here we have good data on that. And elsewhere in the country where we do this work, it's also very similar. And it is interesting because we've worked in all different sizes of communities, all different types of school systems, some that are county coterminous with a county, some that are separate school districts, and it's pretty much the size is going to drive the number of kids that come out of a unit. And so the fact that the modeling is done in that way to begin with is the first, important part, I would say important part. And then the other is that the track record has been pretty good. And the sample size now is large enough where you can be comfortable in the results. And the next question in my mind will be the age of the units. As the units get older, that does have an effect on as well. But I think given the sizes of the units, you're still going to see a similar type of profile, right? And then just one more comment on the revenue side. I mean, the retail environment is changing, drastically and rapidly, and a transition of uses from goods as opposed to services, that's going to affect the revenue generation going forward. So no matter, and we're adapting, we're changing the model now to be reflective of that.
Sure.
So that as we go, as we do this exercise as we go forward, it's going to be, we'll get closer and closer on the revenue side. But the original estimates, just looking at a straight, if you're saying we're allocating, 25% of the building to retail, and we're assuming X numbers sales per square foot, that's not happening anywhere. It's not just here. It's not happening anywhere. Those dollars are consistently decreasing, unless you're in a real retail-centric type of a place that has a draw or has a specific type of a retail environment. So, but that said, we've been pretty close on the revenue portion as well.
So I have a couple questions. I know where everybody's going to have these questions. So when you say you have done well in the revenue, it appears to me that these numbers aren't, that I don't know what you projected on this chart. I know you didn't create it. So
Right.
It's hard for me to see that it's done well in the revenue because of the moving variables here that we're talking
Right.
about. And this particular chart, again, this is not your output, but doesn't show me what it projected at the time and what it said year 2 would be, and then these gross revenues sort of normalize back to whatever the tax rate was at that time. Because I think that, again, I haven't gone into the model, obviously,
Right.
but when it's throwing out an output, it's giving us, it seems to be a very specific number. Is that run through like confidence intervals? Is it a Monte Carlo sort of analysis where it's running through a million scenarios, and then it says, here is after running it through the variances and the various percentages, does it then give you a number, or it's just like, these are the inputs, this is a fixed figure, or is it running through some statistical analysis?
Right. It is the latter. It's the set of it's the budget, the current budget, and the projection off of that budget. And I think and what the intent too is to compare the relationship between the revenue generation and the expenditure generation, not necessarily as a way to say we're gonna make this much money off, the other than the property, other than the real estate property value, but it's the net. Is there enough to cover the expenditure off of the revenue? But no, it's not run through statistical cycles. It is given these set of assumptions, the cost per person for certain types of services, the cost per student for certain types of services, and again, given the marginal analysis of within each department. So it's not every cost that's considered to be affected by
Sure.
development.
So there's no least likely, most likely, and 3 different unlikely
Right.
Scenarios. It's just a discrete figure.
Yes, except for the scenarios. I mean, it is built to run alternative scenarios to get at that
Got it.
multiple least likely. So, and that comes through the inputs.
Understood.
Yeah.
So we often get these figures. Goes up on a slide. It's in the staff report, and then we have a developer sit exactly where you're sitting and say, those are your numbers, they're not our numbers. Run through your model, I don't swear by those, it looks like our projections inevitably say, oh, we're gonna generate a lot more revenue for you, but those are your numbers.
Right.
What kind of feedback do you get from developers? Is that just sort of is your sense that's just sort of their stance when they come before a planning commission, or you're finding that developers are, when they run their own models, they're coming up with similar figures to what this is presenting?
Well,
on the revenue side.
yeah,
I
on
appreciate
the
the
revenue
cost
side.
is its own.
Right. So I can't speak specifically to an example here. We do find, I mentioned earlier that I do find that there might be a commingling of the economic benefits and the fiscal benefits. And so there might be then we're going to have a construction phase where we're going to have construction workers who are going to spend dollars at your retail establishments, at your grocery store, at your restaurants, and that's an additional direct revenue to you. It's a temporary economic benefit, but there's a direct fiscal return because of this development. And so, and I'm not speaking specifically to any application or any kind of analysis, or even a long-term effect of, we're going to have, residents who are going to work or workers that are going to spend their dollars, at restaurants that they wouldn't normally spend, but you're capturing that anyway, and so you could make that case, and
Sure,
it's not
I follow.
it's not a far-fetched to say, well, okay, you're going to have net new workers who will then spend dollars that wouldn't have been spent here before. But that retail, that restaurant is already here, it's already generating revenues. Is there a bump up because of those workers? Yeah, probably, but there may not be, and it may not be material, and it may have happened otherwise, or, et cetera, et cetera. So what this model is saying specifically is those workers, you're getting revenue from the office building,
Yep.
you're getting revenue,
100% follow here.
yeah, so there could very well be a expansion or a broader universe that they're capturing those fiscal benefits. And the property values could be potentially different. They could say, well, it's fine if you want to use, and that's, again, the model can be used in that way, where you can test, say, okay, well, we'll take your revenue assumption, you take your property. And I think this is part of what happens on the ground. And again, I can't speak for the day-to-day, with economic development, but that you sort of say, okay, well, what's what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario that they're potentially coming in with? Or a retail sales per square foot assumption that, they say, no, this is going to be a game changer. We're going to have an Apple store here. It's going to be $1,000 a square foot, and then they go, no, it's really going to be, I don't know, something else. That's not an Apple store. I won't despair, So, again,
We'll take
there
an
could be
Apple
those kinds of discrepancies.
So there are thousands of inputs in this, even from your screenshots that you put up onto it. So in a update cycle, when the city asks for an update, I appreciate, or at least understand, that you are updating the cost side of things for sure. You're saying what's happening on our budget and the staffing required and how a new development would impact the cost element. On the revenue side, how often are those inputs being adjusted, and are they being adjusted based on your sense of, or your firm's sense of, what's happening in the market specifically, or what happened on 301 West Broad and the Byron, and saying, okay, those need to be updated because we now have historical data? So it's a two-parter, like, how often are the revenue side updated, and what's the source of that? Let me just stop there.
Okay. So the revenues are updated the same time the costs are. So this latest refresh was also on the revenue side as well. And so that becomes the non-project specific revenues, those are all updated. And the project specific revenues are updated as well. And so we're taking the historical, the latest and greatest from the mixed use projects in terms of real data, local data from the city, and as well as I mentioned the non-real property values as well. So the other types of revenues as well, to get to the other taxes, other revenues. So those are historical, meaning the latest, so the current development in Falls Church, so property values per square foot and sales as much as we can get in terms of the proprietary number. We don't get that information. It's analyzed locally and then provided back to us for inputs.
Okay, I follow. So one of the things that struck me in even your presentation was that you say that there's a 100% occupancy level. So to me, that would be the kind of data that we would update, because I don't know what our occupancy level is. I live in 301 West Broad, and it's pretty damn close. But I don't know about some of these other buildings.
Right.
So to me, that seems like a very aggressive type of figure, because I even, where I live, I think it's something closer to 98% because of just standard turnover, and there's some lags in there. So to me, that's the kind of assumption that would want to be really driven by historical figures as opposed to just 100%. And so I guess the question really is, how conservative is this model versus aggressive?
Right, and that's a good point on the occupancy. And when I say 100% occupancy, I think the way that the model has been used is assuming the project gets built the way the application says it's going to get built. And so, and that means the mix of the land uses within the project, the types of
let me
land
ask this
uses.
question. So when you say 100% occupancy, is that just because of the sort of year two assumption, or is that because that's just sort of standard throughout? Because in year two, it might be 100%. You get a new building,
Right.
everything's shiny and everything's
Right,
exciting, and they've marketed it. But at some point, these things sort of have the useful life of 30, 40 years. Not that this list has any of those on them, but is the 100% sort of carried through over time, or is it adjusted on a time scale?
Again, the way that the model's been used, it's just at that point, at the point that it's built and it's occupied, this is what the profile would look like in terms of revenue generated and and costs to serve. Meaning, so the revenues. So not only are we assuming full, building of the to get the revenues, we're also assuming full building to get the costs. So we're weighing it against the actual costs that are generated from those units. And there's a couple of different things. One is, so household size, student generation rate, those factor in current vacancies as well, because they're per housing unit. So the student generation rates are the students that come off of the buildings writ large, the universe of new units in the new mixed-use buildings that are, some of which are occupied and some of which aren't occupied. So it's going to factor in that vacancy rate in the inputs to begin with, because it's not, it's total number of units. We don't know if they're occupied or not, the total number of kids that are coming out of those units, and so that rate's going to get at that. There's going to be some vacant units in that number. It's a count of units, not a count of occupied households. So that's going to get at that part of it. So that's one part of it. And then the over time element, I think that's a valid point, because as buildings get older, the characteristics of those buildings change. And as it stands now, the model that hasn't been the intent of the model, the use of the model of that testing of the building over time, which it could be, because it does have the capability of going over 20 years.
So as I asked the question and heard your answer, it seems to me that my question is in some ways irrelevant, because the way what the model is trying to do is help us make decisions on a specific development at a specific point in time, and that as it ages, the occupancy doesn't matter any longer, because what the model is not doing, as you said on one of your slides, is sort of giving us this overall budgetary process. It's not saying that the Byron is now 12 years old,
Right.
so its revenue is decreased. It's a condo, I know, but let's assume it was apartments. Then that doesn't matter, because you're not using it for the budgetary.
Correct.
So all the model does on this 100% occupancy assumption is help us make the decision, and then what we're presented with is sort of an annual figure the annual figure says this particular building is going to generate $500,000 in revenue. And the way I've been taking that number is sort of just straight into perpetuity, just when I hear it. But now I'm understanding that that number needs to be discounted.
Over time.
Discounted, net present value
Right.
of that stream of income to get a better sense of it. And I don't feel like we're doing that. What we're doing is we're doing just straight line projections. I mean, this is not a critique of you, but I'm told it's $500,000 a year, and that just keeps going. And I make an assumption. So at some point, that stream is different.
Correct.
Okay, all right. I have cross-examined you enough. I'm going to turn it over to the other commissioners. So, thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, question of clarification. If you go back about 5 charts to that summary, output with the blue, yeah.
That one.
So the annual revenues, that's basically a tax yield. Is that a way to describe that line? Annual revenues, year 2?
That's all revenues, so taxes plus other types of revenues as well. Yeah.
So would that include things like, business personal property?
Correct.
The depot, the meals tax, the utility tax, so all of those
Yes.
components are in?
Correct.
Okay.
But not increase in restaurant meals tax, because that's the economic impact.
If there were a restaurant as part of this scenario or this project to
Or even
analyze, then
neighboring,
yes.
like there's an existing restaurant, now there's 200 new people live across the street. This is not capturing any kind of
Correct.
impact.
Correct, yes. So in that sense, it's a conservative analysis that it doesn't layer on all those extra.
Anyone else?
I think that this is fascinating, and I think I have seen something similar to this a couple of times. Haven't I, Gary?
Yes, you have.
You have.
Yeah,
Yes,
I
you
know.
have.
I have. Okay, but I think it's good that you have the 2017, and then you have the original net, so you're comparing, back to the original. Would it be of any interest or anything to have a date put on that, on the development? For instance, the Broadway, the Byron, Pearson Square, and Reed, and Spectrum were all done pretty well, much in the same
Right,
few years. But I was just wondering if that would be additional information that would be of interest,
right.
because the rest of them are post 08.
Right. And
Is
there
it?
is a
Is there a
date
date
in that
in there?
original net column, but I think that might have been when they ran it
That's early,
initially. Yeah,
2004.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm
When that
sorry,
was run, I
didn't see
think,
that.
right?
The dates are starting in the second row.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay.
yep,
So then we could actually see some growth along the way if we were to compare, to compare these along the way, if we had this printout for certain years, we could see, but this gives us the greatest amount of growth from the original to the development. Gary?
Yeah, just in terms of answering that, over time, I mean, there was when the initial project was evaluated, then over time, when they're doing the updates every 2 years on average, you got a different tax rate.
Right.
We're tracking the student generation rates. We got real data from projects that have come online. We're adjusting things as we go along, because that's one of the big variable factors, but it's been pretty consistently accurate. And so there's a variety of things, and sometimes when we do the updates, we'll actually change some of the inputs, like, shopping center, retail type of thing, we might update that to the current market, real estate, stuff like that. So it's a little hard to, they're showing what it originally started off at, but then it's not a straight line calculation. There's a lot of things that happen in between. So to look at the numbers in between is kind of, anyway, it's tricky, so.
In our history, Gary, how come, when we approved Pearson Square, we approved the tax analyst building as part of that development?
That's
How come
correct.
that wasn't folded in together?
It is, I mean, it
Is
is,
it? That's not, the Pearson Square 100,
But it lists 400
Yeah,
slash
and
500,
500,
400 is
yeah,
the tax analysis.
yeah.
Is it?
So it shows,
Oh, there
In the
it is,
commercial
okay.
yeah,
Square
it shows the
footage, yeah.
commercial, it listed there, it's over 105,000, and the building, the office building's about 85 or
okay.
so. So this is reflecting the first floor retail in the apartment building, well, yeah.
Because
and then-
if it was just with the retail that's down below now, it'd be really
Yeah.
bad.
I mean, if you look at,
Woo-hoo.
this is before the model and even anything on this chart, when we did the project down on Hillwood Avenue, it was under CD, it was our old PUD, and so it was developed as townhouses and single families and a hotel, you know, it was on separate sites, and this Pearson was an example where it wasn't integrated in the same building, but it was the same master plan that developed it at
Yeah,
once.
that's the only way it was approved. We've got the same numbers for our commercial buildings, don't we, as these?
In terms of same numbers on,
Fiscal impact?
in terms of what you're referring to on commercial, I'm not following.
Well, I was thinking of this building, you know,
Oh, in
compared to.
terms of,
Yeah,
well, it's, yeah,
yeah,
I mean, in terms of, we're not typically running, you know, it's not a mixed, these are mixed-use project examples.
these are all
So-
mixed, yeah, I realize they're
so
all
we're not
mixed use,
running
but
them
do we
on
have
just
it like
general-
on Hilton Garden Inn and things like that?
Yeah,
Yours.
so like, we're not running on those, we're capable of doing that. We
Yeah.
get, I mean, the inputs are straightforward. We could do that, and then we're able to internally look at later on actual sales data and stuff and get some guesstimates on, you know, what they're generating, especially if, like, pharmacies. If you got 3 of them, we can get the data confidentially and average it, and then we're not disclosing information.
Right, I
So-
just meant primarily any of our new commercial buildings, which we don't.
We have
very
a,
many.
you know, we have a couple levels of food categories, so we could plug it into one of those and run it, and it would be generic. I mean, we could do any kind of
Yeah,
food establishment based on
But
that.
this is really good information, and I know that, you know, some people think it's not accurate, but, you know, it's so consistent all the time, and it just really reads out exactly what's going on.
Yeah, based on the comments earlier, I think that's, you know, talking about developers, and I think the consultant was right in that what they do is they look at some of the more economic side
The
of it.
spin-offs.
And the commingling is exactly how she said it. And so, and their modeling approach is a little different. Their assumptions are a little different, even though they'll try and use some of ours. And so this is consistently, let's call it conservative, but it's also very comparable because we've run all the model, you know, projects on the same basis. Even if they come online at different times, you know, we redo it based on the current, you know, model, and we can run it in 17 like we've done here. So they're all comparable across the board. And that's the beauty of what we
So
do,
this,
the
yeah, so
consistency.
this will be run again in 18?
I believe so. I mean, again, this is through, this is economic development, right?
This is
Yeah,
economic,
okay.
Becky
Becky
Whitstone has
does, yeah.
been
Yeah.
doing this of late. I used to do it years ago, but.
I know, that's what I was talking.
Yeah. But the model has been updated, and so this
Yeah.
could be, I believe that's next.
Fascinating
Mhm.
information.
I think so.
I just had one question. I think our chair brought it up a little bit, but I was looking at Lincoln, which looks like it's half occupied, at least at the time we gathered this data, just 109 units, 103 units out of 224. But that doesn't really affect this because, I mean, it doesn't matter if the apartments are occupied or not, we still get the property tax.
Right.
Correct, yeah.
Right. So what's really pulling the Lincoln down at this point probably is the lack of the retail spaces being filled.
Mhm.
Because it is a little concern, they're half occupied, so, you know, and they're just barely making it. So they obviously, based on our original
Mhm.
estimate of pupils, they could definitely have more in there.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay. I just want to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
So the target's not in there yet?
Well, it's just, yeah, you're right, I don't think the target effect would be in there.
No.
Is there
No,
a
that's
target?
pre,
Um,
I shop there. Aren't you shopping there?
I have been to Target. To that question, this always confuses me, but the assessment of a commercial building or an apartment building is based on what? Occupancy at all? I mean, is a half-filled apartment building less valuable when it's assessed by the tax guy than a fully occupied one.
That's a,
I've always been mystified by how commercial buildings are assessed, because it's not comparable sales like a residential house. It's
Well,
something
we'd
else.
definitely be missing the business taxes, which is, and
No,
property
yeah.
taxes for, I mean, I haven't owned in a business in this city, I can tell you, and you own a business,
I
you
do
can
as
say
well.
the taxes are quite big, so.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, I know, for example, the building that I rent from, the tax assessment is not based on comparable sales of other office buildings. It's based on some formula of business activity in the building, which
Right.
makes me
There-
think if it were empty and unused, it would be valued much less. than if
That
it's
is,
full.
that is true, right? And there's an income method and
Yeah, it's a
and
mysterious
real
thing.
property.
I tried talking to the,
Sounds like we have a future guest speaker.
Guess,
Oh.
right.
Do you have any other questions? I had a quick question, which was, this should be quick, it's probably not your, but in the two most recent ones, we have these ranges, which in both estimate fiscal impact, which I assume is mostly related to the ranges we have in the pupils. I assume this is just a result of running it twice with different inputs, and the main difference in input being the formula
The
for pupil
student,
generation.
generation rates. We ran a couple different ways. And rather than just having the fixed number that we talked about earlier, in this case, we're running the ranges based on some different scenarios on the pupil generation.
Right, okay.
We were trying to factor in the Pearson, which is the anomaly, so we would factor that in as sort of a high,
Yeah.
and then we would use the regular generation rate, some variable to.
And I also
low.
think a big update, I don't know what year it was updated, but when we went from a fixed ratio per unit, at some point it went to, it depended on the unit size, which I thought made a lot of sense, because Pearson shows us that 3-bedroom apartments are gonna get a lot more students than, 3 1-bedroom apartments are not gonna get you the same number of students as 1 3-bedroom apartment.
Correct.
So I think that's probably helped the accuracy a lot, which I assume is mostly just based on data from within the city.
Correct.
It's just,
We were getting address level data
Yeah.
with the grade of the student.
right.
We haven't gotten it recently, but in the past, we've gotten that, and
Yeah.
so it's been really accurate. And so-
Yep. All right, our chair has temporarily departed for the city council meeting. He'll be back. So, do you have any more questions about this stuff? So I'm in charge now. For at least 45 minutes. All right, then we'll pick up the pace. Thank you so much. Love this topic.
Thank you.
Come back anytime.
All right, appreciate it, yeah. Good discussion.
All right, next on the agenda, receipt of petitions from items not on the agenda. So, I don't know if everyone knows the agenda, but if anyone, we actually have some public here. If anyone thinks they have a topic they want to ask us about that's not on the agenda, now is your time to let that be known. All right, not seeing any, we'll move on. No action items, on to information items. Right at 8:15, right on time. Planning Commissioners reports. Anyone? Come on. All right, so Tim's been to 45 meetings, but cover them all. Great. Planning Director's report.
Thank you.
You have we got your little cool,
Commissioners, in your packet, there was a division report for the month of October and the first portion of November. I'm going to call out the highlights that are on the front page. Founder to a site plan and subdivision plat being finalized on November 5th, sorry. Obviously, a lot of hard work by this group, the Planning Commission, as well as many of the staff members that are here tonight, so success. Demographics chapter was kicked off with the Planning Commission, and also subsequent to this report going out, it was also kicked off with the Council. They were also very interested in the numbers and how the demographic projections relate to what's going on in the city in terms of economic development, housing needs, and future needs for public facilities. Contracts for bike share equipment were executed on October 25th, and city staff is projecting a rollout in the spring of 2019 for those bike share stations. Again, this is phase 1. I think it's about 13 stations throughout the city's commercial corridors, and then a phase 2 will follow on to that. Let's see. Engineering contract for WNOD crossings. This is very exciting for me that the WNOD, I think, as you all know, has long been a topic of discussion and how to better treat what is a 16-acre park within the city, making it one of the largest park spaces. Engineering and a walking tour took place last week. So engineering kickoff walking tour took place last week. And this is being coordinated, the Crossings project is being coordinated with Nova Parks efforts for dual trails. And I should give credit to a lot of different funding sources that are making this happen. There's some local match funding available, and then the bulk of the funding is coming through the Transportation Alternatives Program, as well as the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority. So using all of those resources that are available to make this community vision spring to life. Grant applications for neighborhood traffic calming submitted November 1. This is a very worthwhile project, and although I think sometimes it comes under fire as being too slow, I will call out that I think in the last 5 years there have been 5 to 7 projects delivered. So prior to in the previous 10, there had been 0 delivered, and a lot of that is due to the stewardship of Jeff Sykes, who the city was lucky enough to pick up when he did early retirement out of Arlington County, and he brought decades of experience to the city. And he's a quiet guy that just keeps getting projects implemented. So we're lucky to have him on the team. He also serves as our liaison for the CACT, the Citizens Advisory Committee on Transportation, which has served as a very effective unit for getting these things delivered. And then lastly, the planning staff did hold in advance what some people call a retreat, but we're looking forward. On October 31st, which is Halloween, and we took an opportunity.
Costumes?
We were all dressed as planners. So.
Oh, that sounds exciting. So exciting.
So we took an opportunity to talk about what is the city's vision, how do we all interpret that individually, and then how do we as a group think about the vision. When we think about that, what are some of the challenges and the gaps that the city's facing today, and how can the city's planning staff help move the city forward toward that 2040 vision and the work we do day in and day out.
That's probably really good to have since you've got new staff.
We do, and so what we want to do is make sure that everyone feels,
that's a good way to do things.
Yep, like they're on the same team. Because we are one team. The so that's what's in the report, and then also if there are any questions about that, I'll tackle that. Otherwise, I want to jump quickly under the director's report, item 2, material that was handed out at the dais tonight. So
Downtown park update.
So I'll make the context switch. So at the dais tonight was a longer version of what was included electronically, which are some design concepts that are still being worked out. But in the slides before you tonight, the cover sheet, shows a concept for the downtown park. It then goes to talk about on the second page the great character and contribution that the park area made to the city when it was first developed in 1966, and then what's happened since then. The next several pages go on to show general deterioration in the materials and the facilities, things like bricks popping out of space, electrical lamps being cut off from the pillars, ADA regulations being updated, but no corresponding changes made to the park. Various states of decay, trees falling into, as they do as they age, sometimes falling into disrepair and needing some attention. And then the last page highlights various efforts that are going on. And before I jump into that list, one thing I do want to make sure I'm setting is the context under which these are being developed. So, as the Planning Commission may remember, several years ago, the City Council did adopt as part of its capital improvements program up to $500,000 in investment for the park. And at that time, the park investment did have several design goals: activating downtown, engaging with the surrounding business community, providing flexibility for various activities, and supporting, of course, the local businesses around it. That this is a different take from what the city's used to in parks. Usually when the city says park, what it thinks of is leafy green spaces where kids play on equipment. But I think the Parks for People chapter that was updated in 2014 and amended in 2016 told a different story about parks, that these are green spaces where people can gather, and they're in economic areas, and plazas are part of the park system as well. And so it's been a long timeline to get this far. It started in 2014 with the EDA, Economic Development Authority, first recognizing the need for investment. 2015, conceptual designs being completed. 2016, EDA supporting funding for improvements in the park, council adopting it in their plan, in the CIP. And then we had a site plan approval by the Planning Commission in 2017, and then through 2017 and 2018, there were various attempts to make the budget work, and that never came to pass for the project as it was originally proposed. And so now, what staff has been doing in coordination with the EDA as well as the Rec and Parks Board is looking at what are modest improvements that could be made to bring the site up to current standards, restore some of the features that have been lost over time, and then as part of that restoration, what are some modest changes that could be made to reinvest and deliver on those original goals of activating downtown and providing more flexibility. And so just walking through that list that's in the last pages of the presentation, as well as some of the concept photos, I think some folks may look at this and say, wow, this is really quite a different park design. When you break it down into the elements, you can see a lot of these actually just fall into the maintenance bucket. So first, the seating caps along the brick walls. Those walls today are in pretty bad shape. There's a lot of rain penetration into the mortar. You've got freeze-thaw cycles that are breaking up those walls. So putting a cap can, one, serve as seating, but two, it also protects the walls for a longer period of time. When you look at the back wall and there's lighting on posts, that's actually restoring what used to be there. So you can visit the site today and you'll see disconnected electrical boxes, several of them without caps, but the utilities are all disconnected. We hear from our electrician. So it's not an ongoing safety issue, but getting lighting back in the park certainly increases the safety. You'll see there are no trees shown in the planter box to the right, and I think there has been discussion with the city arborist about the status of those trees, and it was determined that at some point those were going to have to come down, if not immediately anyway. Then the new pathway through the middle. Today the pathway is falling apart with some cobbled fieldstone, as well as a couple of steps that really take away the ADA access to the park. So the idea is to replace those steps with a pair of ramps and then an at-grade surface in the middle. Also, the planting areas are used as a gathering space, and so breaking down a portion of that wall off a flat landing actually opens up ADA access to the park space that people are using intermittently today. And so then what you're left with are those elements that may seem sort of least familiar with the idea of movable seating and an activity space. And some of this is what gets back to the original goals for the project of increasing the flexibility. And the square footage of that area is relatively modest, and so that's why this is seen as not requiring a new site plan for the project, that it's either maintenance to the original design or minor modifications that don't rise to the level of a new site plan.
I have only really one question. Is this AstroTurf? I'm assuming
That's my question.
is
too.
AstroTurf on one side where it's green,
Mm-hmm.
and then the brown side, is that a hardscape, or is that just mulch or dirt, or what
Just
is
mud.
it?
It's additional mulch.
Just
So
mulch,
it's
so-
today it's mulch protecting
so-
the root zone,
But
and it
what
will
about
continue that
dogs?
way.
Okay, so it'll be still mulch.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, and I mean, the same rules are here as anywhere. You have to clean up after your dog, right? So-
Correct.
Yeah,
But, well, on the AstroTurf side, I've seen people put AstroTurf outside, but then, with AstroTurf they got it at Home Depot. Is it gonna be some special AstroTurf that doesn't like start to dry rot really quickly, like I've seen?
I actually want to turn this over to Akita Ruzu, who I knew has been one of the staff members working on this project and has experienced
And I
the.
am going to punt and ask Kim Callahan over there to speak up to the details on the AstroTurf, because she's been working with someone selecting the right type of surface material
Oh,
there.
they do. I just wanna make sure it's like a commercial grade of
high
some sort.
quality.
Which
dog
median?
feed, will it?
Yeah, okay.
Will dog feed?
Oh, yeah, that's true. Is it pervious? What happens when the dog pees? If that's what Leslie wants to know.
Yes, yeah, so it's a commercial grade product. I have a sample of it that I brought to the EDA meeting, which Mr. Stevens has seen, and it feels really nice. And it is porous. It has a lot of holes in it that it drains through. And what they do is they put 4 inches of gravel and then an inch of sand, and then this what's called eco-fill. So instead of the rubber, it's a recycled material that's actually treated so that it doesn't grow bacteria, and that if a dog does pee on it, it neutralizes the urea as far as what their literature says. So it's a high quality commercial grade product. Now they do make a specific product for dog parks, but we aren't to that level. We'd rather not have it be a dog park, but it can handle if a dog or two, goes to the bathroom on it.
Okay.
And how long is the lifespan of it?
It has a 15-year warranty.
Really?
Yes.
So and then environmentally, there's not been any issues like the artificial turf for like fields that's come into play with a lot of.
Right, so this is a product that doesn't use that, and that, they're one of the few products that don't have the rubber. It's this
Okay.
eco-fill material.
And then the plastic itself of the AstroTurf is the safe.
Yes, yes. So it's a really good product. I can bring information if you
Have more, I'm
see
sure,
it.
here.
No, my only comment is, having been working with the city for a long, long while, I've never seen anything happen so fast in my life. I mean, this is the speed of lightning.
Well, you don't have
I
to
said,
go-
what?
Speed of a chainsaw.
I tell you,
Well, you don't need a site plan approval.
yeah,
So
and,
it was
I
fast.
mean, whoop.
Well, so our goal is really to just get the, kind of, as Paul was saying, fix up the wall, get it into ADA compliance, and start there. And then we can have more discussions about the lighting and the fence and the furniture, and the add-ons as we go. The goal is to have it done by the spring, in the spring of 2016, but let's start somewhere. Let's get the cap on that seat wall, let's get the brick wall fixed, and let's make it ADA compliant, and then we can kind of continue to dress it up.
Because I know a lot of people be hanging around there on the 26th. And that
Yes.
last year, I was scared to death on those walls and the pavement and everything. It was really
Right.
scary.
Well, and that
I'm gonna
was,
walk back there again.
well, that was one of the things we, that kind of spurred on removing those trees that were already in bad shape. We wanted to get them down before the tree lighting so that there could be more room for people to congregate during the tree lighting ceremony.
Well, there was, instant uproar from, anyway. But I said, my God, that actually happened that fast.
And there is additional information that's going out. I think there is some question that over the weekend, there was some work done to remove the trees. And I think some of this is messaging what is the project timeline. I think if you scroll through the images that are on the screen now, you'll see minor variations in either the bordering or the seat configurations. And I think what that reflects is that this is still a design in progress. So things like the ADA requirements in removing the trees that are in bad shape and restoring the lighting that was there before, those are fairly easy things to make decisions on, and those are going forward now. I think other things like what kind of seating and what does that fencing look like, and is there a gate or no gate, those are decisions and conversations that are still ongoing. And like Kim said, the goal is spring 2019 for a park rededication.
In future, public art. It'd be awesome.
Correct. A lot
Awesome
of
on both
mural-ready
sides.
walls in the city. We keep talking about it, and I think it's exciting
And there's still
to see a
no
partner willing to
policy
make
on
that
it.
happen.
But I guess it'll get done someday.
All right, any other questions about the park update? No. All right, next item. Or do you have any more for your director?
No, that's all.
Correspondence, I don't know that any of this was all that new to us. There's the affordable living policy letter that we wrote last time.
Mhm.
We let Arlington know about our plans, their zoning changing plans. Was that right? Okay.
Yeah, so this is, the correspondence section is really just there for letters coming into the city that affect the planning commission or of interest to the planning commission, as well as letters going
Yeah.
out to make sure everyone has that final version.
And the third document's about, there's gonna be a tour of the railroad cottages on December 6th, which I thought was really cool.
Says it's sold out.
Buy tickets, what?
What?
Oh, I guess they
Well,
have a
maybe
limited
they'll run,
number of people they wanted to go.
Another,
So we can still go.
Well, the city's, I can certainly look into getting invitations for the planning commission.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah. I think the city's 2040 vision talks about the city being a leader in a number of fields related to urban and local and city planning. And certainly the cottages is something that people are looking to figure out how is the city so successful in making this happen, that it is a topic you see covered in a lot of the planning literature, but actually navigating that process
right.
is a question that many communities still have.
Yeah, and the fifth item is the new Beepus tree booklet, which we also have on the front of our beepus.org site for download.
Right, that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Very well done.
Yeah,
Wow.
I
that
did
was
have a
cool.
question on the ULI tap
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
item. Is the readout on that or the final presentation, is that recorded or is there some way we could get those results?
Yes, the video is recorded, and I got a link to that today. We can get that forwarded to the planning commission in the next package, and also the final report should be coming out soon as well, and I'll make sure that, of course, gets to the commission as well.
Thank you.
Great. All right. I think that closes number 7. Number 8, work session items. First one looks easy enough.
So included in your packet, these are all work sessions. No action is expected tonight. Item 8A is a proposed amendment to various pieces of the city code relating to language regarding people with intellectual disabilities. I actually want to turn that over to the author of the staff report, Akita Brucey.
Thank you. Good evening. So the City Council is considering amendments to several sections of the code to update language referring to persons with disabilities, as Paul mentioned. With the proposed amendments, housing, taxation, and zoning sections of the city code would be updated to reflect the current state language. This is simply an update that replaces outdated code language with new state terminology. There is no functional change to the zoning code. The council at their public meeting on November 13th granted first reading and did refer the item out to the Planning Commission. They also scheduled at that meeting a second reading for December 10th. The Planning Commission recommendation to the council is scheduled for December 3rd. And tonight is a work session item. If you have any feedback or comments in advance of your public meeting on December 3rd, we'd love to hear them today.
What should we consider?
On December 3rd, the recommendation will be to recommend approval to the council. Staff doesn't see any red flags with the code amendment. Again, there's no functional change, it's just to replace the language with the new language.
To clarify, by ordinance, every recommended change to the zoning ordinance has to come to the Planning Commission
Yes.
for review. So in the staff's review, we were looking at, when I say we, I mean staff, we were looking at two things. One, compliance with state code. I should say three things. One, compliance with state code. Two, not being offensive. And then three, ensuring that there were no unintended impacts of changing language. So there was some cleanup to the code to consolidate definitions, while also making sure that the same flexibility that exists today. So group homes are permitted as a matter of right. There are some group homes that go outside the usual definition, and those continue to be allowed by special use permit, as is done today.
Yeah, I think this is great, and I noticed, I think a year or so ago, a applicant had some language in one of their proffers that was taken from code that had some of these terms that are no longer considered acceptable. And so I think this is awesome. The only question I have is there a way to scan city code and find any other references to these words? Because I would favor cleaning that up whenever we have opportunities. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think what they pulled wasn't from anything listed here, so I suspect these terms are used in the code elsewhere. Not critical, but I don't know if it's like a full text index search on the word and
Yeah,
then,
you can
I
do a
think they've
keyword
changed.
search of the
yeah.
municipal
Anyway,
version of it.
but I wouldn't slow this down in order to do that, but I fully support this update. And if nothing else, it's way more efficient to define it once and then refer back than constantly having the same definition in
That is
8
good
different
coding
places.
practice.
That's a mess, so.
That if you see in the line items for the staff report there, line items 7 through, looks like 8 or 9, there are several sections of the code that are proposed for update, housing, taxation, as well.
All right,
as
so we'll get to them, is what you're saying.
and housing, and so those are all included in this code update.
Oh,
So
in
this
this
will
one.
clean all of those sections
All right.
in one action by council.
All right, great, excellent. All right, we're done with that one?
Mm-hmm.
Now I think this is why maybe some of our audience is here, the library variance.
Or a joint thing.
Oh, we're doing the joint thing later?
Yes.
Okay, well, maybe that's why they're here.
So item 8B, Commissioners, before you tonight is a work session on a proposed variance for the library. And I want to turn this over to Akita Brucey for a brief introduction of the materials in the staff report, especially with a focus on when it comes to variances, what is within the Planning Commission's primary purview. And then we'll turn it over to the applicants for the latest on the designs.
So the City of Falls Church is the applicant on this project, and they're proposing to renovate and expand the existing public library facility. The proposed project involves renovating the building interior and adding approximately 6,600 square foot of space to the existing building. The new building footprint requires 3 variances related to lot coverage and setbacks. Those are provided on line 62 of your staff report. They include the variance to allow a front yard setback of 7.5 feet instead of 25 feet on Park Avenue. A second variance to allow a front yard setback of 10.5 feet instead of 25 feet on North Virginia Avenue, and a third variance to allow 57% lot coverage instead of the maximum 35% allowed under the current code. The BZA is scheduled to consider the application at the public hearing on December 13th, and the Planning Commission public hearing for the Commission's recommendation to the BZA is scheduled for December 3rd. For tonight's discussion, staff recommends the Planning Commission give particular attention to site layout, streetscape design at the intersection of Virginia Avenue and Park Avenue, and the proposed exterior design of the building. Staff hopes to work with the applicant, the Planning Commission, Tree Commission, and the AAB to refine those elements at site plan. What's before you tonight are the variances for discussion, and what will be before you for action on December 3rd are also the variances, and site plan will be filed if and when those variances are approved by the BZA. With that, I'll defer to Ms. Callahan for her presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions after the presentation.
Thank you. We also have the library director, Jennifer Carroll, and our lead architect, Mark Minetti, with BKV here to help answer questions. But I'll give you a brief update on where we are. We just finished the schematic design phase of the project, which is about 15% completion. And I believe as Carol was here back at the end of August to talk about where we were at the end of the conceptual phase, how the library board, after a lot of discussion with the staff and the citizens, have decided on the corner entrance concept, so the entrance at the corner of Park and North Virginia Avenue with the children's section on the bottom. So with that conceptual design programming decisions made, we moved to the schematic design phase. So at that point, what you're looking at now is a schematic level document. So we're not quite to the site plan level document, but we have enough information to know where we want those building walls to be and how far back we're going to be from the property line. So as Akita mentioned, on North Virginia Avenue, we're asking for a variance of 7.5 feet instead of 25 feet from the property line. I think on the staff report, it's flipped. It's actually 7.5 feet on North Virginia Avenue and 10.5 feet on Park Avenue. And then a 57% lot coverage. So right now, the building is at 41.6% lot coverage, which is already, which they received a variance in 1991 to get that. There's no way to expand the library if we don't get a variance on the lot coverage. With the setbacks, we want to move it closer to North Virginia Avenue. The board voted on, at the start of the project, to have the addition come towards the west instead of towards the east, because that allowed us to kind of change the streetscape along North Virginia Avenue, make it wider than it is right now. It also allows for more light to get into the building. It keeps the parking, it keeps the vehicular access around the building, and it also allows for more contiguous public space, because in 1991, the staff space was kind of added in this, southeast corner of the building. So if we had put the public space back here, that staff space would have broken it up. Where here, if we move it to the west side, this is the addition shown, kind of outlined in that darker color. We can get a more contiguous public space and kind of keep the staff space in the back of the building. Just to address some of the comments, one of the, an earlier submission to staff showed a ramp along North Virginia Avenue. That is not the intent. That was an error in the original design. It's not shown on your package because that's not the intent. We have an 8-foot pedestrian way along North Virginia Avenue. And then I think we have an even wider area along Park Avenue. Sorry, if I can, it's awfully small up there. We have about, in some areas, we have about 17 feet between the building and the streetscape, and then it narrows down because we want to maintain that green space kind of at the corner here. So we're keeping the sidewalk as it is there, that 5-foot sidewalk, as you kind of round the corner to the parking space. But we can certainly look at reducing that green space if you want to have the full, full width of the streetscape in that area, but that just means we'd kind of cut out some of that green space. The other thing I wanted to note is that we need to have our ADA parking spaces along Park Avenue. That's the only spot for them. So kind of eliminating the parking on Park Avenue isn't an option. We have to have that ADA parking at the front because that provides the access up into the sidewalk and then up this grade into the entrance of the building.
The staff report talks about on North Virginia Avenue, the width is only 3 feet.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. There was an error. Originally, they had shown a ramp, a strange ramp there. That's not the case. It is 8 feet.
So am I correct? So on the Park Avenue side, there's kind of like a little bit of a wall, it looks like, so that grade would be there.
Right. There's a little bit of a wall, a rise to get up. That's kind of like a ramp.
So they're parked on Park and then they'll come up here and then kind of go up that rise.
Exactly.
And what's the width there?
That is that ramp area is 6 feet.
Okay, so they have 6 feet wide. So that
Right.
would work well for them.
And it's a pretty mild slope, Mark. Is it about 2%?
It's not considered a ramp, the grade is less
Is-
than 5%.
So, okay, so it's just a little bit of an upgrade, okay. But I just wondered about the width because it is, it definitely is higher than the sidewalk. in
Yes.
some
Yes,
places.
there'll be a break. One will be level, and then the grade falls away to the corner.
And does that represent like a little bit of a cap or a wall that keeps you,
We think a knee wall would be appropriate in that area,
okay,
because you need to identify the transition, otherwise someone might trip on it.
right, that's what I was wondering. It wasn't really clear, okay.
Did you say that there was some grass area in that area?
Yeah, where the existing planter area is,
Where-
we're
where the,
maintaining that. There's
the
an inlet.
Parking is?
So we're,
Handicap parking?
yes.
Is
Oops.
that?
It's
is
bushes
that-
though, not grass.
Is that safe
Is,
for people getting out of cars or for anything in the handicap area?
so what we're working on, the handicap spaces aren't set their exact location along
Okay.
this way. We're working that out now. I think they're shown where they currently keep switching on me, flipping on me, sorry. They're just shown where the existing spaces are.
Okay.
The thought is that we'll actually move them up closer towards the intersection.
Okay.
And we can widen the streetscape out in that area as we need to.
Sometimes that's very awkward, not real safe to get out into any grassy area that might be wet or slippery.
Oh, well, there's a sidewalk
There's-
between the curb and gutter and the building.
Yeah,
So
where it
it's,
currently is, you can get out fine.
Yeah.
so-
Yeah, okay.
And I like the bump out that we've added, because, so many
Yes.
people cross there with children.
Exactly.
And I
Makes it better.
understand the tension between getting more sidewalk but also having planters, but I
Right.
think you need the planters there, on Virginia, because it gives you a sense of safety if you have children.
Sure.
To have a planter between you and the road.
yeah.
Is that?
And we are looking at kind of expanding a little bit the bump out on North Virginia to the south to give us a little bit more space, especially around where that stairway is.
That makes sense.
And well, it slows people down on that turn a lot.
Right.
Paul, does the setbacks that they're anticipating, does that disrupt the Park Avenue, Great Streets plan, for that whole area in any significant way, or can it still fit in with the plans that you envision for Park Avenue?
Yeah, so the Park Avenue Great Streets plan envisions a number of elements, and a lot of them are included in this plan. So it includes bump outs, more prominent pedestrian crossings, nicely designed buildings on both sides, which this is certainly going in the right direction. And then the other thing I would say that it includes is ample landscaping and street trees. And I think we've explored ways to get those into the front of the building. And I certainly think that during the site plan process, that should be explored.
The setbacks don't materially upset them.
I think that's where the planning staff comments that you see starting on line 123 of the staff report talk about flexibility for that on-street parking space. That I think the building setbacks from the curb are a little bit less than what's called for in the 2017 streetscape standards. And so looking at those on-street parking spaces is a way to satisfy that desire to have ample pedestrian space as well as shy space from the building, perhaps plantings right up against the edge, and then plentiful space and soil volume for street trees.
I could see maybe taking away some of the parking on Virginia because it's just already very congested in that section anyway. But I definitely see why you would need the ones on Park for a handicap access. I'm hoping now that the entrance is more on the corner, more visible, there's a lot safer parking along Park Avenue in terms of getting in and out of spots. Because people coming in and out of those Virginia spots have the traffic from the buildings on either side and the shopping center. So that, if you were gonna do anything in terms of removing parking and putting more landscape, it would fit better in Virginia, but that's not really part of your Great Streets plan.
Well, certainly the great streets don't stop where the intersection
I know,
picks up,
yeah.
so you do need the visual corridor to continue. I think the parking on Park Avenue, I think the 8A spaces are of course important. Everybody needs to be able to access the building safely and as easily as possible. I think the number of parking spaces on Park Avenue might be something in question. The Park Avenue Great Streets report, you may remember, shows using that parking lane for multiple uses, both street trees as well as automobile parking. And so it may be possible not to take away all of the parking on Park Avenue, but to utilize some of that parking space for a street tree or two. Otherwise, that whole frontage is lacking in that sort of element.
It looks like, you know, the old building does have that grass area, which on here says like yard inlet.
Yes,
That
there's a
tree-
storm structure right there.
Is there a
Yes.
storm structure?
Yeah,
Is that what it is
there
on that
is.
corner?
Yep.
But, like where the pine is, maybe back there could be an additional tree. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll re-landscape that whole area,
Okay.
but we need to keep the storm structure.
But I do want to go back to what you were saying about continuation of that bump out, just for
Here,
it would look a lot more finished.
yes,
And
we've,
and be the width of the stairs.
Exactly.
That whole section.
yep, yeah, pulling that down south so it lines up with the stairway, or even where the building kind of bumps out, bring it all the way down.
We have the report from the Architecture Advisory. How were any of the suggestions there? Did that change anything? in
We're,
the design?
we're looking, it's not gonna change how far out the building goes. What they wanted us to look at was the massing
Right.
of this corner piece.
Right.
And just ways to lighten that up, but that doesn't mean we need to bring it closer to the street. It just, we're looking at different materials, different ways and heights, but nothing that would affect the setbacks. And the same thing, I think the other comment was this, let me find it here.
The size of the windows?
This section here where the 3 windows are and this roof, they wanted us to bring it up and have a parapet here instead, and then kind of look at the scale of these windows. That was one of their suggestions.
And I agree with them. I think the different roofing elements are just too many of them. It's a little
Right.
choppy, and there could be a little bit, maybe some smoother transitions between these different.
It is an added expense.
It is, okay. Well,
And then bringing this, Mark, you can speak to it more maybe, but bringing this corner element up to the same level of the element that everybody kind of liked on North Virginia, so that it has a little bit more prominence.
Right.
yeah.
So that's been a discussion since the corner entrance was first conceived, was that how that element does it need to be more prominent? At one time it was actually taller, the tallest piece of the composition was the corner element. And I think some folks thought it was too tall, so we pared it back. Now maybe it's too small. So there's a happy
Or you can't make
medium.
everyone happy.
Well, there's a happy medium that we'll strike. I do want to, the building's a small building. It's a single-story building. There was some discussion about trying to take the 2-story with the clear story portion of the addition, which is down North Virginia Avenue, and maybe extending that. We're concerned about overwhelming North Virginia Avenue. So you really do want to break the building up into smaller, more residential, more single-story scale, but it's still got to read as a unified whole, and it still has to have read as a institutional building, a library. So there's some tension there. But if you look at the way that the original building was constructed with the original piece, and then the wings that were added in 1982 and 1991, you end up with smaller roof forms, and I think that that's important for this project. You don't want to be a monolithic addition. You do want it to be scaled appropriately.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
good, I appreciate that.
Visually, it's not so linear.
I think at the AAB meeting, they also talked about checking with the estate
Right, with the colonial style. Yes, so that was the other takeaway from meeting with the AAB, was that they preferred us to take a more liberal definition of colonial style. But yes, so those are things we'll continue to work through as the design evolves.
Can you describe, so what is the rationale for taking the spaces out of off of Virginia Avenue? You'd extend the sidewalk into the,
We would just see where the bump out is here, this bump out at the corner. We would just extend that bump out a little bit, maybe to here, so that you have a little bit more pedestrian space right where these stairs come
you
down.
lose one.
Yeah, well, I wasn't talking about wiping them, I was not talking about wiping them all out. I just want to extend the bump out a little bit further. Planning,
The staff was the one
different
talking about removing more parking to make, to widen the streetscape there.
All the way down to.
Yeah, I agree with it a little bit on the safety issue, because I
Mhm.
think that there's just too many cars in that little section of Virginia trying to park and get out of things and come into things. It's rather scary.
Counterintuitively, it's more unsafe.
Right,
But-
yeah, but my feeling is now that the entrance is on the corner, I think people will be able to feel like they could park on Park Avenue and they're closer to it, you know? But anyway, I'm not, like, I don't think we have to take away those, but I'm just saying, I think it would be safer without.
I'm
I know.
probably being dense, but on North Virginia, how wide will the sidewalk be?
8 feet, and then you have a 6-foot planter area.
Okay.
So it's 14 feet total, 2 feet shy of the streetscape requirements.
Okay, and then on Park Avenue, I'm sure I just missed this. The utilities go somewhere? Like there's a telephone
Yeah, so
pole
right
in
now,
the
there's
corner.
see that black dot right here?
Yeah.
That is the existing utility pole. What we can have Dominion do is move it to the edge on their dime for ADA accessibility. It's
So
not,
move it across the street?
no.
We're not
I-
doing that underground.
Don't tell me what I want to do. I find the telephone poles in the sidewalks to be an abomination. I'd rather put them in the street.
So there's talk of undergrounding, but that is a discussion that is still ongoing and that isn't finalized as part of the Great Streets Project. The thought was they'd underground from North Virginia all the way to the State Theater, several
So
blocks.
just so I'm clear, it's being dismissed out of hand, the notion of putting it across the street. It's fine, I just want to make sure.
Yes.
I think that answers yes, given the mature tree canopy on the frontage along
Yeah, there's
Cherry Hill
actually
Park.
getting too cold for this project.
Yeah.
All right.
I remember Cindy talking to us about that one.
And then the sidewalk on Park is how wide?
So it's at its widest, so the building at this
How
corner.
about at its narrowest, because that's fine.
Okay, so you've got, at its narrowest, it's just the existing sidewalk, so that's 5 feet
Against the street with no
against the
buffer?
street. It's just the
So it's a
way the
bummer that we
existing
can't
sidewalk
improve it.
is. But as you get closer towards the addition, it widens out, and you have, this dimension here is 11 feet, 11.27 feet, as you go down towards the corner. And then you have a 6-foot ramp, and then another, 6-foot area to walk around if you're not going to the building.
And then I know this isn't part of this project, but I'll just mention since we have planners here. Obviously, this intersection looks awesome, making it even more dumb that there's not a sidewalk that continues to the other part of North Virginia, right? Seems clear to everybody.
There's discussion internally, I think there were some concept sketches for what that full intersection might look like with a curb extension, not only at the
On the other side
corner
too,
shown, but also on the matching corner across Virginia, as well as the whole frontage along Park Avenue. And then using that bump out to pave the way for a sidewalk that would then run along Park Avenue, across North Virginia, and connect to the existing sidewalk in front of the townhouses along Park.
Great. That's all I got. Welcome back, Chair.
How fast did you drive?
I drove within the city speed limits, of course. They did take the
The
vote.
proposed reduced 20 miles
Do we
an
have an
hour?
announcement?
Yeah, that to go ahead with the interim agreement passed 6-1.
To who?
Mr. Snyder was the, oh, with whom? Oh.
care about that. With who?
EYA.
Huh?
EYA.
EYA?
Correct.
Okay.
Great.
Are there any changes or any considerations for the parking lot here? This is not,
We're not changing the parking lot. There's not a whole lot we can change. It's tight.
stormwater, those kind of issues you'll address later.
Right, right now, what we're looking at is a cistern under the parking area here, where we would, the roof drains would drain to that cistern. I think it's about 5,000 gallons. And originally, the thought was that we would landscape with it, but there's not quite enough landscaping to use up all the water that would be collected. So a couple of things we were tossing around is the city has different types of trucks to a landscaping, a watering truck for landscaping. We could fill it up with that. And there's also trucks that flush out the sanitary sewer system, so we could use the water for that. So it's really, can we get those trucks in that parking area, and how, if we can't, how do we let them fill up with that water?
The whole issue of the lot coverage ties in with what we do on stormwater.
Right.
If we do enough on stormwater,
Yep.
we can justify better
Right.
the coverage.
Right. Well, right now, there's no stormwater management, quality or quantity, so anything we add is
There's a
good.
low bar.
Right.
Absolutely, parking lots.
And I know it's not being that part, but I think the staff report mentioned bike parking. You're gonna consider that somewhere?
Yes, of course, yes, we'll definitely have bike parking on the site. Maybe potentially where we, bump this curb, if we bring this curb down a little bit, that would give us more room potentially for some bike parking as well. It's a tight site.
Is that included in the streetscape, the type of bike parking?
Yeah, we have different standards. There's the green bike, and then there's the loop.
Except that our parking, bike parking requirements don't apply to city buildings.
And this building's also seeking LEED certification, so we'll be,
Well, that's true, that'll help with
Right.
the certification.
although we're not gonna have a changing facility
No.
in this building.
There's bathrooms.
Needs to have a shower.
This is getting capital share, bike share?
I think the closest, in phase one, I think the closest capital bike share station is gonna go, 50 or 100 feet to the east of this site. If I remember correctly, I think it's near the mid-block crossing, to City Hall. I think there has been a request to get a bike share station closer to the library. That's certainly something worth exploring.
Virginia, and that's the area.
That's right, it's about 40 feet long for a 13 or 15 dock station, so that would certainly use up a fair portion of that space.
40 bike versus what, 2 cars? Spaces?
40 feet, so it would be 13 docks. Yeah, yes, well, and if you turn one of those spaces into a bike corral for privately owned bikes, you can usually fit about 10 bikes in each single parking space. I know Alexandria has used this to great effect in Del Rey, especially in places where you're a little bit tight on the corner and you wouldn't want to park the car that close to the intersection anyway. It's a great way to take advantage of that curb lane that's otherwise wasted.
One last comment that I have, I just hope that whenever we do anything of this magnitude, that we do it with future needs, or, I just hate to ever have to tear up something that we just did to do undergrounding or anything like that. I mean, really, it's just
Yes.
ridiculous to not think ahead, and if you're doing work there, to do it. So, just an opinion.
Now, we're coordinating with the Great Streets effort to make sure that, what is planned for Great Streets, doesn't conflict with this.
And Andy hates poles.
And there's 2 poles here.
And there's 2, and Andy hates that.
And I maintain just across the street.
They run into his baby strollers.
Okay.
Is that it?
If there are no further
Yeah.
questions from the commission, I think, as Ms. Ruzi said, I think the next item is bringing this back to Planning Commission The action, as Ms. Rusi said, would be a recommendation to the BZA on the variance application. And then, depending, of course, on the outcome of the variance application, it could come back to the planning commission as a site plan application.
Could come back to the planning commission?
Well, if the variance gets approved, it's coming back.
Got it,
As
okay.
a site plan application.
Understood.
The level of investment here, in terms of the building and the site changes would mandate a site plan.
Okay, I apologize for missing part of this discussion. I assume my fellow commissioners represented us well. I have nothing to add, because I don't actually know what we decided, but I have looked at the site plan and have no problems with it as presented, though I understand there's the setback issue, and if there's some parking that needs to get removed as a result, I would, in general, be supportive of that. So I don't know where it stood at the end of this discussion, but it's generally my thoughts. If there's no other questions, then thank you very much. All right. We are on to our final work session item, though I suspect this will take a little bit longer. We are going to talk about the George Mason High School site plan, and this is a joint meeting with the Architectural Advisory Board and the Tree Commission, or what's their new name? They have a new name?
Tree Commission, I think they proposed a new name, Urban Forestry Council, and I think that'll have to go through the process of an official renaming by council. If I could, Mr. Chair, suggest that we take a short break while we invite members of the other commission to the table, rearrange the chairs, and give the applicant time to load the presentation.
I think that's a wonderful idea.
Could staff also figure out if we can have the air conditioning stop coming on, because we're getting, every now and then we're being blown with really cold air.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know if you can fix it or not, but I'm not sure why.
Yes.
Well, we've got school.
So how long do you think we need?
School board is
4 minutes.
building people here.
Let's, it's 9:30, let's take a break for 10 minutes.
Think you can do it in 5?
I hope you get everybody back.
Yeah, we'll get
Okay,
everybody
5
back.
minutes.
10 minutes, that's almost
10
enough
minutes.
time to go into my car and take a nap.
Take a nap
I
right
have
here, just lean back
some,
more.
I
There you
b-
go. You're a dad. Dad can take a nap anywhere.
so we're gonna reconvene here at
2 dads back.
9:39.
Dad can take a nap anywhere.
All right, good evening, everybody. We're going to resume our work session here. Let me first of all say welcome to everybody. This is now, while it was originally a Planning Commission meeting, this is now a joint meeting of the Planning Commission, the Architectural Review Board, and the Tree Commission / Urban Forestry Council. So I do want to welcome everybody. We have the applicant here as well. What I think we should do with such a large group, I do think it's worthwhile to go around and just quickly introduce yourself, just so there's a sort of roll call and people have some names. But what I'd like to do is hear from the applicant, and then what we're going to try to do is try to facilitate the discussion in a little bit more organized fashion, as opposed to just saying, let's go around the room one at a time. I think there's too many people. What I'd like to do is spend the first 10 minutes after we hear from the applicant. We have a notepad that's up there, and we'll just sort of cover in general the number of topics we want to talk about. Maybe we can isolate it down to 3 or 4. Maybe it's 10 things that people want to talk about, and then we're going to sort of allocate time to each topic depending on how many there are. So I don't want this to go late into the night. There's not an official time restriction, but if we can sort of get a sense of how long we're going to be talking, I think that would be helpful from the outset. So everybody, I'd appreciate it if you help me with that. And as you're thinking about the presentation here, sort of think about the topics we want to cover. So without further ado, let me start by saying I'm Russell Wadiska with the Planning Commission, and why don't we just roll it around.
Andy Rankin, Planning Commission.
Melissa Dees, Planning Commission.
Lindy Hockenberry, Planning Commission.
Stevens, Planning Commission. Howard Fuentes, Planning Commission. Dennis Demansky, Tree Commission.
With
and
one.
Forestry Council.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. If you guys just all just turn on the mics as we do this, you can turn them off when we hear the presentation, but it's for not so we can hear you. But
Costa, the Tree Commission.
thank you.
Barbara Tessner, Tree Commission.
John Tessner, Tree Commission.
Sharon Friedlander, Architectural Advisory Board.
Jim Way, Architectural Advisory Board.
Phil Osborne, Architectural Advisory Board.
Victor Wong, Architectural Advisory Board.
Ken Ellis, civil engineer on the design team.
Jennifer Max, and the executive from the design builder, Gilbane.
Jonathan Fitch, landscape architect.
Jack Chen, architect from the design build team.
Greg Overcamp, architect with the design build team.
Gary Fuller with the City Planning Office.
Paul Stoddard, planning director with the city.
All right, thank you very much. Let me first just turn it over to the, what are you calling yourself? I heard architectural design team. We have a, is that the name we're giving it, or is it Gilbane slash, you know?
We just go by design build.
All right, design build team, can you proceed?
Okay, good evening. We're very excited to be here to talk to you guys. We've started this conversation with, especially with staff and a lot of you, a long time ago. So so tonight is a very formal, very important event where we can get you up to date with where we've been and where we would like to go from here. So we have about a 20-minute presentation that we can get through, and I'll be joined by Greg and Jonathan with support from Jennifer and Ken as we go through. So without further ado, let's move forward. So tonight, you've seen this agenda. We have a pretty robust number of things we want to get through. So we'll start with, first of all, an update on the latest site plan. But first, going back to explain how we got to it in the first place. If you recall back in the spring, our concept is actually really simple. It's to consolidate, or in a nutshell, to consolidate all the athletic fields into one contiguous area behind the existing middle school. So we have the new multipurpose tennis and softball together with the baseball and football fields. Parking, therefore, is then allocated in the areas that are open. We talk about the area to the right that is adjacent to the economic development team, as well as the existing parking and bus area that is to the bottom of the fields. So that leaves us the location of the building. That's the big star right there, as well as an entry plaza that we're kind of talking about, the Woolnorth effect that Jonathan will describe later. So that's kind of in a nutshell of how we got to where we are. This is the site plan that we rendered for the competition. Some things have changed, and we'll go through that as we run through this presentation. So it's important to note all the things that's been going on the last few months. We've engaged the city, we've engaged the community, we've engaged the staff. As you know, there's the Sunday series that we've been a part of, and a lot of you are familiar faces, so I think that you've all have at least gone to at least one of them. Campus Coordinating Committee, of course, meets every couple of weeks. Campus Infrastructure Planning Group, that meets every couple of weeks as well, and we meet with staff about various different topics. Engagement with the planning and building officials and staff, so we've done that as well a few times, actually. And meeting with the fire marshal and emergency services. So we've done a lot of things lately, so tonight is a kind of a culmination of where we are today based on a lot of these meetings. So where we are today, this is the latest site plan. It's not as beautiful as you've seen before, but it gives you a clear sense of where we are. Not a lot has changed. The building orientation has shifted for the better. We've right-sized a lot of things. The multi-use field now can accommodate both soccer and field hockey. The tennis courts have gotten a little bit bigger because we've been asked to accommodate the possibility of winterizing it with a bubble. And of course, the bus parking has been moved off-site. So that allowed us to do a lot of things, right? And that includes, of course, expanding the vehicular parking on-site. So in addition to that, we'll talk a little bit about our sustainability strategy. We are going for gold minimum for our project. We have officially registered on the USGBC website. It's important because I believe This is the first school that has officially registered with LEED, so we are there. So if you do a search on George Mason, that's what pops up, and we're in the process of going through that. And you'll see at the end of the project, it'll be public about how we have achieved LEED goal at a minimum. In Falls Church. Falls Church, yes, yeah.
We don't have that.
But you've had other opportunities, right? You've had other opportunities. So we're very excited about that and guiding through the schools in this process. Some of our sustainability goals and strategies: reduce, reclaim, and absorb. We'll talk a little bit about this in the next few slides. Flexibility for renewable resource. Of course, it's been known that we are targeting net zero energy, or the ability to get to net zero energy. And of course, green education, being able to have a didactic building. And of course, there's other goals as we move along as well. Some examples of what we're doing. So obviously we talked about the compact building. So a tight footprint and going vertical certainly helps. Density and access, a lot of it we don't have anything to do. It just so happens that the site is in a great area. We have the economic development that's going to happen next to us. We have access to WMATA. We have access to bicycle routes. We have access to public transportation. So that's great. All great for LEED. High performance envelope. We're going to have a high R rating for both the skin and the roof to be able to keep the energy in. Geothermal energy, of course, we talked about the use of geothermal well fields for our project. High efficiency HVAC system. Of course, responsible materials that come from the design side as well as from the client. And most importantly, population that cares. We can sit in front of you and talk all great things about sustainability and about LEED, but ultimately, it's you guys and it's the schools and it's the end users, it's the advocates for us. So that really gets us going there. Net zero energy. So part of the requirements for the design build team is to be able to accommodate ultimately net zero, to have the ability to become net zero. So all of the things that we talked about before lead up to that. So in a nutshell, how do we get to net zero? So our energy plus our plug loads minus generation, that gets us to net zero in a nutshell. Some of the measures that have been listed here, again, this is more exhaustive than our project can withstand, but we are doing a lot of the things. VRF system, geo-exchange, DOAS system, dedicated outside air, responsive controls. We're doing a lot of those things for this project, and we're very excited to do those. So the roadmap to get to net zero, this is an EU-wide chart, and it basically is a measure of how efficient our building is. So it's always based on a baseline number. Usually it's ASHRAE, or in this case it's Energy Star, so either or. And then you start applying the different measures that we're doing to the building. High performance envelope, of course the use of LED lights, the high efficiency HVAC system. And that brings our energy use intensity way down to a level about 20. That's really, really good, if not great. And how do we get to net zero? How do we bring that to zero? That's generating electricity. And by and large, it's PV panels. There are other ways to do it, but the easiest way to do it is with PV. So as we turn back to the site plan submission process, and this is a culmination of meeting with the staff the last few times, and being able to accommodate the economic development team and some of the unknowns involving what we're calling the trapezoid, which is that blue area there. So in discussions with the staff, what we'd like to do is to submit the site plan in 2 phases. And we're calling it phases. It may not be the right word, but the idea is that we reserve what we're calling phase 2, which is that blue trapezoid, and kind of block it off. Because we don't know what's going to go there. We have an idea, especially after tonight. But for the site plan approval, for us to maintain our construction schedule, we need to submit to the site plan hopefully in about a month. And so we don't have time to wait. So in order to do that, we're kind of divorcing the site between the trapezoid and the rest of our site. So that's what we call phase 1 and phase 2. In the summary there, you talk about submit phase 1, coordinate with the economic development team, and then submit phase 2 as an amendment to the original site submission. So where we are today in terms of the site plan and site access is very much what you see here today, with the exception of a new fence line that you see at the very bottom there, and consolidated entrances. Again, this goes into a lot of the security strategies that we're doing for the school. Keeping the middle school pretty much what it is right now with the existing entrance. Having the main entrance along the plaza you see there in the top right. A narrow ticketing entrance that you see there, that's for the school when they have ticketed events. There's also a secondary entrance on the bottom left there near the parking lot where the current bus parking is right now. That's also another way to get into the fields, and that would be for example, your weekend rec leagues or maintenance and things like that. So there's two ways of accessing the site and the ability to close the entire site off. Quick zoning analysis here. Some of the things that we're going to talk about later on is parking and bike parking. We're going to be 6 floors above grade. We're still figuring out what the average grade is, but we're going to be 6 floors above grade with a total of 7 floors. One is below grade. And the rest we'll talk about in the next few slides. So I'm going to turn it over to Greg Overcamp to talk about the exterior design.
Okay, so following up on the actual layout of the site, what you're seeing in the aerial is how the massing of the building is being worked out. The new high school is being connected to the existing middle school. In the middle school, there's some minor renovation, as well as a brand new kitchen going in that is going to serve both the middle school and the high school. Get some better efficiencies between the two schools since they're located on the same site. There'll also be a new loading area that serves both schools. The massing of the building is basically divided into 2 bars with what we call the heart of the school between them. So there's a north and a south bar. Can you go to the next one? So from an elevation perspective, we're looking at doing basically a contemporary modern building that fits in with the neighborhood context. We're looking at about 3 different types of masonry, a reddish, a tannish, and a grayish masonry, along with aluminum frames and metal trim to match those frames. The glazing will all be high efficiency glazing with a low E tint on it, all going towards that net zero efficiency that Jack was talking about before. These are the other 2 sides of the building. You see the design carrying around throughout. We believe, even though it is a taller building, it still fits into the neighborhood context very well. So the front elevation, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the original elevations from the concept. This is basically a refined version of it now, looking at how the canopy entrance sequence is working. The tan masonry to the right there is the stair tower with glazing in it for basically security, so you can always see who's traveling throughout. Very clear entrance defined, really gives a new definition to the high school coming off that main plaza area. This is back from the stadium side. The 2 gyms in the lower level, the main gym and the aux gym. There are 2 basically tunnel structures that go from the locker rooms out directly to the field, below grade there. And then it's classrooms and other school functions above that in the tower bar.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Finch, talk about the landscape and site quality.
Oh, okay, thanks. You've seen the site plan, and what we're going to do is look at 4 areas of the site and somewhat larger, so we can talk about the character of those areas. First is the entry zone, divided into 3 parts. There's a plaza adjacent to the building. There's a shared space, calling it Wohnhof, where the drive crosses that area, and then a community grove on the east that will have the ability to have events for the school, for the adjacent development, and for the community at large. We anticipate that the paving material will generally be brick. That will allow us to accommodate all the donor bricks that will be taken from the other school, and also there'll be plenty of capacity to put more of those in. Trees around the outside of the community grove, and a more special place on the inside set off. Jack talked about there's the main entrance, and immediately to the north of that is the, it's the ticketing entrance. All of the athletic events of the school that require a ticket will have the public entering through a gate at that location, and then walking down the north side of the school to the football bleachers and concessions. That walkway will be tree-lined, and on the north side of the walkway will be a slope that will be available for students to sit and view the games from that location as well. From the football concessions and bleachers to the south is what we're calling Mustang Way. We'll look at this from the other direction shortly. This is the main spine of the athletic facilities. It connects to the secondary entrance from the parking at the south, and gives access to all five of the athletic facilities: the football, the baseball field, the new softball diamond, tennis courts, and the multi-purpose field that will be available for public use in off hours. This is the area. It shows Mustang Way. Should say at Mustang Way, it needs to be 20 feet wide, because that's the required width for fire truck access. But the paving need not be 20 feet. So the paved area of Mustang Way will be considerably narrower, and the rest of the 20 feet is taken up with reinforced turf that will look like a lawn until a fire truck has to have access, in which case that reinforced turf will be able to carry the load of the fire vehicles. In the upper, the blow-up in the upper right corner is a dining terrace for seniors in the high school. This is immediately adjacent to the cafeteria. Seniors would have access to that special place. It would be set in it's a garden setting with set among flowering trees. We can see two examples of sort of the character of that on the far right. Then for the softball, coming between the dining terrace and the field is a slope. Also would be available for seating for softball games, and the row of flowering trees that frames the field. Mustang Way is the route for access to all the athletic facilities for the high school and for the general public. But for the middle school, they will need access to the multipurpose field for their recreation activities. And for that, we've designed a cross-access calling Husky Trail that will connect back to the middle school. And where the middle school and Husky Trail crosses, there will be some kind of a space for the use of the middle school students. Exactly what the character of that space will be has not yet been determined. It could be grassy, as in the upper photograph in the middle, or it could be a more paved court games kind of space as well. Please understand that we're showing this on the original master plan, the original illustrative. It's not actually going to be in the middle of the drive. No, the drive, it actually will be by that drive and the parking have been rejiggered so that there's some space between it and the tennis courts.
We'll show you that in the next slide.
On the last space that I'd like to talk about is on the east side of the middle school, and it is an area of calling it, it's sort of like think of it as a mound garden with trees. It will be a place where students can gather before taking the bus home, and generally be available for informal small groups to talk and socialize. There are a couple of photographs on the far right that show something about how we would envision that. There would probably be some seating in there in a manner that is yet to be designed, but there'll be seating, there'll be lawn to sit on, there'll be trees for shade, and a place that's really congenial for the students to gather before and after school. There is a considerable amount of parking in the plan. Jack will go over the exact numbers, but we're trying to get up close to 400 spaces. And so how the parking lot is organized and landscaped will be key to making them more humane. We are envisaging that the planting will be without curbs. There will not be curbs in the parking lot for the planting, but there will be paved areas at the end of the islands so that if people cut that curb off, they won't be making a mud hole out of the planting. There are code requirements that we are exploring about the amount of planting and tree cover in parking. To meet the current code minimum is going to be very, very difficult given the priority of having so much parking on the site. But we will be doing our best, and what we do install will be done in a very high quality manner.
Thank you, Jonathan. So we'll continue to talk about the rest of the site here. Next topic is tree preservation. So we're using the existing site here as a kind of an underlay of information that we'll get to in the next few slides. So in an overall kind of high level concept, we want to show you what we're not doing. We're not touching those trees. So the trees behind the football field, the trees behind the softball field, and by and large, the trees along the edge of the WMATA access road, we don't plan to touch. Now, there may be some instances for construction reasons that we may touch a few that we'll go in and replace, but the overall concept is that we don't plan to touch any of that right there. So once we start to overlay our intervention, it's important to see where everything is. We're building in areas that really don't have trees. And that's important to note because what we're planning on doing is to put trees in those areas. So that's a diagram that discusses about where we want the trees. Obviously, the trails, Mustang Way, Husky Trail, along our school road, those are very, very important. Jonathan talked about the grove that's in front of our plaza. Exact density of trees, exact number of trees, we haven't figured that out yet, but certainly the 20% that's been asked of us, we are making a commitment to do that minimally for sure. So that's overall what we plan to do for the trees on the site. So Jonathan started to talk about the parking. So this slide, we'll park this here to talk about parking a little bit. 9x18 spaces, 23-foot drive lanes, we got all that. Based on the section 48969 table 3, we have 400 spaces required for both, accounting for both middle school and high school. When you take into consideration using the gymnasium, for example, for special events, and we use the gymnasium because that is the largest capacity by far in the school, that gives us 375. So it's important to note that the school does not plan to have simultaneous parking, meaning that if the capacity of the school is 1,500, those same kids are not going to be in the gym at the same time. Now, we have heard once every 4 years there is an event for polling and things like that may bring the capacity there, but by and large, that is the plan for parking here, is to assume non-simultaneous parking for the special events, and for the school itself. Again, this is for 1,500, which is something that the school doesn't plan to get to for a while.
But you know, currently, we do have simultaneously events. Are we planning on never having that again? I mean, we've had middle school and high school events. Yeah.
All the time.
Middle school, high school, and cultural events on the weekend going on at the same time.
But that's, when he says simultaneous,
Yeah.
it's simultaneous with school being in session.
Thank you.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. Well, sometimes we have stuff going on then too, but okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So currently, we have 398 spaces, and we're actually very excited. We're a couple short, but we're very excited to even get to that point. If you recall, we've floated 370-ish a while ago, but we've really worked hard. Obviously, the fact that the bus parking went away does help us. So we feel really good about getting to 398, and we're continuing to work towards that 400 number. Now, that's assuming that we have 183 in the trapezoid, what we're calling phase 2, if you recall. So whatever happens with the economic development team and the negotiations that happen from now forward, that's to be determined. But this is based on our site plan that we've presented to date. We're at 398. 215 for phase 1 includes all the ADA that we need for phase 1. So phase 2 will be handled separately by itself, basically, in its own entity. What Jonathan started to talk about, which is landscaping in the parking lots, because of the heavy pressures to provide as much parking as we can, a couple of the different requirements present some issues for us. The perimeter lot landscaping, I think, needs to be some coordination. We obviously have a lot of existing trees there that will satisfy. We are planning to plant more trees along the perimeter, but some of the things like bushes, tall bushes, and things like that goes against the security issues that the school has. So I think we'll have some dialogue between staff and the committee in regards to some of those things. The bigger issue is the interior lot landscaping requirement. For where we can, some of the non-parkable zones, like Jonathan has shown in the precedent image, we are planning to park. But if we follow the letter of the law, we're losing 70 spaces to that. So that's keeping in mind. So more coordination, dialogue needs to happen between the design team and you guys in regards to that specific requirement for parking. Site lighting here, as you know, the existing athletic stadium and the baseball will be existing to remain. Our design build team is providing lights for the softball field. There's an alternate that will be exercised or not at a later date for the multi-use field, as well as for the pathways, Mustang Way and possibly Husky Trail. There's a note there at the bottom that says that all parking areas and drive lanes will be lit. All the fixtures will be full cutoff, dark sky compliant here. We have not figured out exactly what they are just yet, but that is the plan for lighting on this site. We'll have building lighting as well. So the next few slides, we'll talk about kind of our stormwater management strategy and the coordination that's happened to date with the staff in that regard. So from the RFDP, our strategy is basically that. So it's utilizing a combination of permeable pavement, natural turf, and detention to accommodate the stormwater requirements for the site. In this case, it's showing obviously using the trapezoid, using the parking area, Mustang Way, using the multi-use field below that as a detention facility, and of course the natural turf for the softball. So subsequent to the RFDP, and in the last few months, obviously we know a little bit more about the project, and we know that the economic development team, our neighbors, may present something different. So if we recall a few slides back, we talked about the phase 1, phase 2 strategy. Our team looked at how that would occur. So what are some of the things that have changed is since the RFDP that have affected our stormwater calculations? Well, the demo of the high school is now off of our table, right? So the economic development team is doing that, as well as the requirement from the RFDP is to replace that high school into what's the state? Meadow condition. That's very important. So all of those potential credits, I don't know if I'm using the right word, but we have our civil engineer here to help. affected our count, and it effectively gave us a hardship that was very difficult for our budget to accommodate. So in discussions with the staff, with Carly and with Jason, I know Jason's not here anymore, it was suggested that, well, let's look at the site, let's look at what we're not touching, and let's look at limiting the LOD and see where we can go. So that's what we did. So we're taking our site plan that you see here, phase 1, phase 2. Remember, phase 2 is being accommodated separately by itself. So this is our proposed LOD. Are the lines exactly where we're going to do? Probably not, but this is talking about a high-level concept. Obviously, we're not touching the athletic fields, both the baseball and the football. And as we showed in the previous tree preservation slide, we're not touching those trees back there. So once we limit the LOD to just that, it really helps us. Preliminary calculation shows a slight deficit. We've since done more design development, but it's something that we can handle, and it's something that the project can certainly bear if you agree. One slide on utility coordination. So this is basically talking about that we've been in coordination with the city at the highest level with Dr. Noonan and City Manager Shields in regards to where the city would like us to sewer. The original RFDP called for sewering down to Route 7 to ultimately to manhole 106, which is on the bottom right corner there. Subsequent to that, the city has told us that they would prefer us to sewer up top along what we're just calling School Road for now, to Haycock and then down to manhole 106. So we've done that coordination, and as our schematic design shows, we are showing sewering to there. Now, there needs to be coordination involved of how to complete it from our site to manhole 106. That's still to be determined. But the point is that we're in the continuing discussions with the city and the coordination with the city, we are doing just that. Next few slides talk about site circulation. I think a lot of it, as you see the slides, you get an understanding. I do want to use this to talk about the middle school bonus space, and that's actually right here. So if you can see, we changed the access to the service and moved it closer to the middle school, and then it created this kind of bonus space right there. So that's what it is. So it's within the secure zone. It's within a close walking distance from the current exit of the middle school back here, and so it's easy access. So that's where the diagram was showing. Jonathan talked about fire department access. So we have met 2 times with Tom Palermo, yes. On fire department access, as well as security with the chief. So in order to get to the back of the site, we need Mustang Way to be fire department accessible. So as Jonathan talked about, it has a minimum requirement for that. But we don't want to do 20 feet of asphalt. So in order to do that, we have a smaller pedestrian paved zone for our pedestrians. So we keep it as a pedestrian zone, and then we make up the rest of it with the grass pave. If you know Burke Lake Park, they use it there, so it's very common in our area. And so we plan to use that here in a couple of areas here. One's along Mustang Way, and another one in this kind of void zone right here where we plan to have our electrical connections. So DVP needs to every once in a while be able to back up a truck to service those things, so we need to provide that. Greg talked about the service. So all the service has been consolidated behind the middle school in this area. And a fire truck can do a 3-point turn back there, so we've checked that. And then, of course, we have the through road that you talked about, that we've talked about here. Bike access, as it is today with this site plan, is planned to happen along the very edge of our site, both from Route 7 and out to Haycock, obviously with coordination. The whole point behind that is that we want to divorce the bicycles from the vehicles. So we give them a nice little area to the right there, and it gives them safe access to our front plaza. Obviously, yeah, it's actually, so it's right. So this is it right here. So it connects to Route 7, whether It's on a property, yes, absolutely, absolutely. So whatever this ends up being, that's one of the coordination items that we'll do with the economic development team coming on board. Site circulation, this talks about arrival and dismissal. Bus queuing goes along here. Middle school parent drop-off is exactly what it is today. Basically using the parking lot around here. And then we've kind of graded this out, but we have shown what we originally showed in the RFDP, which is a very similar concept to what the current middle school does today. Again, this will be coordinated with the economic development team of what happens in the trapezoid. Sure. It's within the secure fence zone. Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, depending what the activities are that take place there, which hasn't been figured out yet. Yeah, there may be a need for fencing of that area specifically, but we don't know the program yet, so.
Right, so what we've created is a flexible zone, so they can ultimately choose what they want to do there. Pedestrian circulation, again, much of it I think you got from the previous presentations. Mustang Way, Husky Trail, access through the North Promenade up here. So bicycle parking. So we basically have two requirements that we're looking at right now. Falls Church has asked us to look at the Arlington standards, which we have there. And for LEED version 4, there is another standard. So it's important to know that these are minimum requirements. There is a big delta between the Arlington standards and the LEED standards. And our guess is that what we'd like to provide, what is reality, is somewhere in between. So that's something that I think we'll need to talk to staff and you guys on of what the actual number is. So during our design development, we're actively looking at where we're going to provide these racks and how many we can accommodate. But these are the calculations that we have today based on 1,200 students and staff. You see 120 spaces based on the Arlington standard. 150 is if we accommodate the 1,500. And then for the LEED standard, it's 70 spaces and 84 for the 1,500. For LEED, they have to all be within 100 feet of the existing entrance, as you see in the graphic there. These will all be exterior bicycle storage areas, yet to be determined in terms of design and what they actually look like just yet.
Class 3?
Yes, class 3, yeah.
Gary, I had a question for you. You mentioned the Arlington standards. Our standards, of course, for office and retail don't apply to municipal buildings. What if they did? What number of space bike racks would we need? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I wouldn't know right offhand, but, we gave them the Arlington, example to make that their target, so.
I understand.
Work
I'm
off of that,
just curious what we're giving.
Yeah, I'd have to look at the code and figure that
Require
out.
of
But you're exactly right, it was based on office and so forth.
We're almost done. So finally here is loading and service. This is the back area that we just talked about. So we accommodated two loading berths. Instead of a raised loading dock and all the kind of gymnastics that is required in terms of floor changes, we're going to provide a dock leveler. So basically something that comes out of the ground and can accommodate a truck, a pickup truck, nothing at all, and it's out of the way. So that's something that we're actually excited to do, and it really helps us architecturally, both in the building and outside the building. And same for trash there. So we're gonna accommodate. We're gonna have some privacy screens, and that accommodates. So that size there is upsized for the 1,500. They need half of that today. So there is plenty of room for them to get up to the 1,500 whenever that is. And like I said, fire truck does have access back there. And happy Thanksgiving. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was quite extensive and informative. All right, as I said, instead of like going around the room here, I want to try to organize this into some categories. We got Jeff, who's going to write some things up on the board, but here's some of the topics that I heard during this presentation and things to think about. We may not have questions about all of these things, so I'm just going to read them out. Maybe you make some notes about things that you care about, and we'll put them up here. But obviously, the issues for the two boards here, we got the massing and the architectural issues, and then we have the trees as they relate to the specific boards. I also heard issues related to, or topics covered, sustainability, the athletic fields, density, parking, that's both cars and bicycles, security, site circulation, loading, stormwater. Oh, you're writing them. I can go slower. I thought I was just I was just throwing them out so people could think of that, and then we say which ones we want. But I'll go way slower here. I'm sorry. I was looking at my own notes. I just can't see it.
What else?
Stormwater. I had the fields, I mentioned that already, just in case people want to talk about the fields, the athletic fields.
Community space or with the entrance, and I understand the Memorial Garden is out there somewhere.
You got security there. And then I had some other ones in terms of future planning and risks, future risks. So those are the ones I heard. I don't know that we need to talk about all of these. So this first few minutes, maybe 10 minutes, just talk about which topics we want to cover, and then we'll narrow it down so that we can have an organized conversation. It's already 10:30 or 10:25, so I was trying to consolidate this. So let me just open it up. If you have other ones you want to add to the board, and then we can say these are the ones that we want to talk about in a meaningful fashion. So go ahead. If I got them all, then we can move to the next part. I don't know.
Or you could nominate one for discussion early.
Does anybody have anything they want to add? Yeah, go for it, Dennis.
So, Mr. Chairman, this is a general question I have is the site plan review process. It's unclear to me what role the boards and commissions will play in that process.
So is the topic process then?
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe we got them then. So I'm assuming the Architectural Advisory Board is going to want to talk about the massing and any architectural issues. I think that just those first two need to be just topics you guys have an opportunity to weigh in on. We lost them. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I wanted to, I don't know that we're covering all these, that's all. Can you put checks next to massing and trees? Those are like guarantees, that's why people are here.
I think we'd probably, Jim Way, Architectural Advisory Board, probably also talk about circulation a little bit. And I'd also like to hear a little bit more, because it was brought up as a constant variable, is phase 2. And because we're talking a lot about other stuff going on, and I'm not sure what that is.
Yeah, I was remiss, so I missed that one. I would have considered that coordination.
Okay.
But that's definitely an item I have questions about, just what the thinking is about it. I know it's just been announced within the last couple hours about who that partner may be, or the neighbor.
Oh, okay.
Well, and to be clear, part of the challenge with phase 2 is that covers an area that has the existing school on it, which will remain until all of this is done.
Right, I mean, it doesn't follow that exactly, but you're right, and Jen can speak to that better, but we are building everything in phase one anyways, before we can tear down the high school, or before the
Someone
developers.
else is tearing
Tearing, yeah.
Tim, do you want to talk about sustainability, or you got your questions? And I'm saying that jokingly, that's his favorite topic. Anybody want to talk about sustainability?
I've been very pleased all along at the energy aspects of what they plan, and the EUI of 22 is fantastic. So if they can pull that off, I think we'll have very low energy bills in the future, so we'll benefit from the energy strike. So I think the area of sustainability, I'm going to defer to the tree commission, because that's an area, the whole landscaping, where our key areas that I think we haven't heard a lot about. So I have to defer to them.
So let me defer to you guys. Do you want to have, you have questions about this area? I'm just trying to get topics to, so you're clear.
I know that in discussions with the ESC chair, we're concerned about the heat sink and how we can mitigate that effect. We submitted a question as part of the review process, and it's unclear to me what the response was. So I know that's one concern that the ESC has, and kind of carrying the water for them as well as for us. But from what I can see, you've added quite a few trees closer to the buildings, which would tend to mitigate that. And I just wondered what your response was.
I want to get the topics first, and then we'll go through. It's tempting to just start going into questions already. Sustainability, is there another meeting with the Environmental Services Commission? This is it. This is the briefing. All right, well, we'll have one question on sustainability. And we're going to try to see how much time we have to discuss these. Do we have questions about security and access points? Okay, you can put an X.
I just had one.
Let's not ask it.
Okay.
You have a question about it?
Just one.
Okay.
Itty bitty.
A small question about security. Thank you.
You'll be surprised at itty bitty it is.
Are there questions about the loading? No. Great. Excellent. We have questions about parking. That must be a yes. Yep. All right. Stormwater. No. Good. I mean, I'm on the other committee.
Yeah, I have a
and
clarifying
there's
question
a
about
ton
stormwater,
of
but
stuff about
I'm happy to
stormwater.
talk
but
about it at some future
yeah,
date.
I think it's not this meeting. Any questions about the fields, athletic fields? No, great.
Just a little.
Lindy.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's right. You got to pick one topic where you got a little
I've gone to all the Sunday
question.
meetings,
I know, so you're super informed.
but just one, that's all.
How about the community space?
A lot.
Other than Lindy.
No, with the Memorial Garden and
Okay, we got a
everything
little
else,
check
and the
next to
entrance
community
to the
space.
school, because that was just brought up yesterday at the Sunday series.
You're going to have
The
like
addition.
3 minutes for all your little ones.
That's fine.
Okay. Future planning. This is sort of your, again, Tim, because I know you specifically, how they're wiring it for future things and lighting. You talked about on the alternate space. Anybody have any questions about that? Or, all right, great. No. I want all these things answered. I'm just not in this forum. People have concern about risks? Nope. Okay. We're going to do process because that already came up. And then phase 2. All right. So how many we got? There's a lot. Just what's the count?
Some are one question from Lindy.
Oh, come on, don't pick on me.
It was massing / architecture.
Well, massive slash
It was
architecture.
it was a general, but fine. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
they need
Right.
a form
Because
for
the
that.
massing's pretty well taken care of.
Okay, 10, but they're not all equal. There's like 7 and then Lindy. So,
God, I'm
It-
feeling so important.
it's 10:30. How many minutes do people want to dedicate to these, each of these. I mean, if we did 10 minutes, that's too long because that's an hour, that's 70 minutes. Get 1 or 2 questions from each is really, I mean, honestly, that's about all we have time for.
Okay.
So, let's go. Yeah, let me first turn it over to you. You could figure out what together. I know this is hard. Why don't you start the architectural questions, what you have, and maybe it's a more general type of question, and then we'll narrow it down if possible. It is what it is. If we're here for a long time, we're here for a long time.
I mean, massing, like we just said, it's already pretty well set. I mean, there's not much to offer or comment on there.
I think it's done relatively successfully. I mean, I don't really have any other feedback. I really like the way that it's been developed and the way that it relates to the field beyond and the way that you provided a little bit more context so we can see it with the surrounding buildings, but we also know that there's really tall buildings there. So to me, it's a successful solution to the problem with this.
I mean, I don't think I have anything else on it.
Wow. Okay. That's amazing. that's.
I yield the
time. Well, let's go into. You said you want to talk about circulation as well, so let's move into that. I know that's out of this list's order, but you had mentioned that was a topic you were concerned with.
I mean, did you have anything read on circulation? Just about so, and it might even go into the risk category a little bit, but so. And I assume by circulation, we're talking about student drop-off, pick-up, all that stuff. Right?
And I guess pedestrian circulation as well, but yeah, so however you define it.
So coming from Haycock Road, if you're planning on buses coming from Haycock and into the site and dropping off up in the front there, is there any risk as far as what's happening with the property along that thing as far as people going into parking garages for offices or something like that might back up the buses? Or has that been even looked at all as far as the mass of buses coming in at one time and what happens to that with office traffic?
Well, to just take one step back, so we've been told that road is going to happen, so we've certainly assumed that. Up until an hour ago, I guess we didn't know exactly what was going to go there, but certainly now that we know, we're certainly going to study it and see how that affects us. By and large, once you get to our site, that's a private road. That the school controls that, and during arrival and dismissals, it's one way. So buses come, as you just said, from Haycock to the left and then down, and they'll queue in front of the school, roughly where the arrow is. So basically, we can fit. And it does go a little bit in the bend, but we can fit all the 13 buses at the time. As you know, in the morning, when they drop off, it's pretty early, and both Mary Ellen Henderson and high school, they share the buses, right? So there's no two different things. So that's probably going to be before everybody comes to work, although we are early risers here, so we need to figure that out, right? Yeah, sure.
One of the things that we did study the proposed development and the one that was selected a few hours ago, there isn't any direct pull-ins off of what we call School Road.
Okay.
Everything happens more internal, at least the way that it's shown in their plan. Everything happens more internal to their circulation. So that road is sort of maintained as an outer circulation path, not as individual pull-ins.
For that property, there would probably be additional curb cuts to come in off of Haycock into that property.
That is what they're showing, is additional curb cuts, yes.
So it'll almost be dedicated, almost.
The bus line is dedicated.
Well, so about midway through the developer proposal, it shows a curb cut that enters in and goes down into what their central spine is for their development.
So to those
Bus road or
so to those who
Off of
are
Bus Road.
It would appear
unfamiliar,
that parking garage entrances would not be on School Road.
so to those who are unfamiliar, the city council voted this evening to enter into an interim agreement with the developer EYA PN Hoffman Regency. It's similar to this, three different companies involved. So that information and how their general location of buildings and flow of traffic, that should all be on the city's website. It was already, but if you want to go, there was 2 finalists. They've now chosen one. This gives for sure a lot more clarity to this team and, you know, they need to, instead of considering two proposals, they might have some more information and figure out what the conduits are to answer some of their questions on how things are going to be planned. It is just an interim agreement, meaning that there's still negotiation to be had, but we're down at least to, at this stage, a finalist, and I'm sure it'll provide a lot more clarity. Though, on your Phase 2 area, there is some question marks associated with that, even with that proposal. But anyway, it's just so anybody is aware, that's very recent news, and it'll be in the newspaper this week and on the website for you guys to check out what that looks like.
So I have one question about the flow too for the parent drop-off. So I see the pink line where the buses line up and that the MEH parents will be circling through the MEH lot, and I guess the George Mason people are going to be going through that triangular kind of lot. But so right now it looks to me if the buses are along the school bus pink line, that the parents are coming in and out Route 7. Is that what's being said? Because right now you can't turn in there legally. So how are we going to do this?
And it's kind of a cluster if you are coming in with high school parents coming out and buses coming out.
Correct.
And then people are getting stuck in that loop-de-loop, in either one of those parking lots, you can't get out.
Yeah, you're going to have two trying to come out, two coming in, and then we're putting even if we could do the turn in the 7, then we're dumping them out on 7, going to Tyson's, and there's no way to turn around.
They'd have to go around.
I mean, you have to go almost past 66 to get
So
back.
this is there's a lot of moving pieces on this particular circulation that are yet to be answered. One is with the proposed development, but there's also signals, traffic lights. There's going to be there's an effort to make sure there's no cut through Chestnut. This is very dynamic at this point, and so as the site circulation relates to Haycock and Route 7, we're not going to have any clarity, or this group won't be able to provide it at this point. If there's questions about the internal circulation, that's sort of what I meant. But
part of it
this is
because
going to be complicated no matter what. VDOT's very involved.
The entrances of these two lots are across from each other. So I'm just saying at some point you're going to have to think about what's going to happen when we have two flows of parents coming around and then coming back out at each other. At the same time, other people are coming in from somewhere and going in. And so I just think that that's something that have to be looked at eventually. And I know right now, I mean, I guess the way the flow, it makes sense that the entrances are across from each other. It actually makes more, I mean, if you're looking for a spot, that's easier. But for this, it would be better if there was another entrance for one of these spots that was not aligned like that. Anyway, just something that concerned me when I saw it.
Perhaps on the other side of that triangle space.
Yeah, I don't know, because there's something there. So. And I know that you guys don't exactly know what's going on your side on that side.
Okay. Let me move it then over to the Tree Commission and see if you have questions related to that.
I had a couple questions about the space around the middle school. Could you just provide an idea of how wide the space is on the parking lot side? The green sort of, that part there. How wide is that?
At the narrowest point here, we're talking about,
I'm sorry, going up, on this new side here, that would be along the bus, where the buses come.
right
Yeah.
right here.
So you're talking about that as space where middle schoolers could circulate. How big is that?
Right, so if we start at this kind of tapered end here, I think this is about 25 to 30 feet here, because we're
Okay.
doing 23-foot drive lane, so you can certainly use that scale. And then it tapers out here to
Bigger
probably
space.
bigger, more than
Okay.
40 feet
Okay.
in this area, maybe in close to 50, because this we know is 30 feet right there.
And that's designed to be largely landscaped, is what I've,
It is, yeah.
Okay, and then my other concern was,
One thing to add to that,
Mhm.
there is the existing loading dock over there for the middle school, which is actually getting filled back in with green space now.
Yeah,
Because the
right.
loading area is getting moved back to the
Right.
backside of the
Yeah.
school. So that area that's currently not available to the students will now all be green space in that area.
Right, although I have a question about whether the exits from the middle school cafeteria are changing, because it looks like the cafeteria is coming right out to a loading deck, and I don't know how they're accessing their recess space, and middle schoolers still have recess.
So part of that is based on we're doing some renovation work as well as an addition to the middle school to accommodate the new kitchen. We're actually moving around some of the spaces in there. So we don't have a floor plan with us today, but the entrances and exits from that space are actually being modified to change that. So they will have more direct access to that, what we call the bonus area.
The bonus area, and then along those lines, can you give me an idea of how big that is? Is that comparable to what they have right now, or is it not at all?
It's probably a little smaller, right? They
As
have
in
a
how
full
much
court
smaller?
basketball basically, and so that's a little
Wow.
smaller. Yeah.
I'd take issue with that. I think these are kids that are still outside every day, and they need some space. And being on the tree commission, I would advocate some green space for them too.
It's also important to
Access,
note
so-
that within a short walk, there's access to all of the
Yeah,
new
but
spaces.
they're probably
the
not allowed
multi-
to go all the way over there, right? So they're gonna be confined to a certain space. So that's just something that we need to think about.
Yeah, I asked about that. They might be given a little bit more time to go out to the practice field to use that, but it all depends. It's not big enough as it is for what we use it for now. And I'm
Yeah.
a little bit afraid of backing up trucks at the loading dock and everything there. But we just would have to have personnel handling that.
Well, and the current space is inadequate. It's got lots of
No,
things
it's
in
already
it.
inadequate.
We've had a kid trying to play football run into, I think it was an air conditioning unit or something, got a concussion.
Right.
During recess. Because it's just chock full of stuff everywhere.
Right.
They need like a clear area to play.
Yeah, it's a problem having that, the playground space.
Yeah,
up
it's not
there.
really
I've been asking
accessible, and it looks like an inadequate size. So my last question is about you mentioned the interior parking space landscaping and the code requirements that we have right now, and that if you followed them, are you saying you would have to reduce what you have by 70 parking spaces? Did I hear that right?
That's correct, right?
Okay, does
And that's including phase 1 and phase 2.
that includes phase
Yeah,
2?
mhm.
Okay.
As you can see here, there's some obvious zones where we are not parking because of geometry, and where we're certainly filling those in with green space. But you see in this area, with the exception of the ends here, which Jonathan talked about in terms of the trees and landscaping, it's by and large a very efficient parking lot, and it's meant to get as many cars in there as possible. I mean, there's no other way to explain it.
Yeah, go for it.
I definitely wanted to build on the question on process. Where are the councils and the commission? I know we're the tree commission, and wherever we go with the name, it's still about urban forestry and the green space, and we do work with the environmental sustainable folks. So this is a joint meeting, and we appreciate that. As a volunteer, we feel a little shortchanged. It's like, okay, you have 2 seconds, you got to look at all this stuff, and now, only pick 1 or 2 little questions. So where is the process? Because as the tree commission, we get into the details. We want to see what trees you're planting, where you're planting them. It's like, okay, you're planting these trees. Trust me. So where does the tree commission, where's our involvement in the next process?
Can I answer that? Let's
Yeah,
have
go
let's
ahead.
have a meeting. I think
Good answer.
a lot of what you see tonight is the fact that we can get all of you guys in one room and really give you a huge download of information from the point that we started in July, I think it was, until now. And we have met with staff, with Gary and with Carly and those guys, but we need to meet with more, and we may not even know who else we need to meet. Let's meet. So, yeah.
Good. No, that was a good answer.
If I could, just, I'm gonna ask Gary to add on to that answer. Gary Fuller is gonna be the lead case planner for this, and I think he can talk about the fact that there has been no formal submittal of a site plan yet. So this is really a pre-application work session, a chance for everybody to talk, see where everybody's coming from, what are the main issues to address in those subsequent meetings that are gonna happen as part of the formal submittal and review process. Gary, do you wanna talk a little bit about schedule?
So, you know, based on the scheduling and meeting with the design group, they're looking to submit in December next month, and they're looking for site plan approval by April. So it's about a 4 or 5 month process. A lot of times site plans we work through them in about 3 months. So we've got time to work through the issues. It's a nice opportunity to meet with them. I know the existing tree preservation is their main focus, and then tree canopy and so forth. And so there'll be both groups, the AEB and Tree Commission, are advisory to the Planning Commission, who is the approval authority. So the City Council is not involved in this, but it's a city project, so we want to make the best thing we can out of this opportunity. So I know the team will be meeting with you and as well as the rest of us.
Did that answer the question then?
One more question, is that okay?
Yeah, of course.
The community space that's in front of the high school, is that where you're envisioning putting memorial trees? There are a lot of memorial trees that are going to come down with the old high school, and
There are going to be, there are going to be a number of trees planted there. The exact number isn't quite known yet, but it's going to be densely planted with trees.
Could you put that slide back up?
We're working closely with Brailsford and Dunlevy and I'm not sure the exact name of the group, but Education Foundation. So we're very closely coordinating. So there was a cataloging of all of the existing memorials, trees, benches, bricks. And so that group is working to help us understand what items want to exactly be translated over. Like, so, whether it's trees or the bricks was the one that was specifically articulated. So as those items are identified, our team is then identifying on the drawings where we will locate those items. And then there's also a separate process that group is doing for items that won't directly get translated over, but to be digitally cataloged. And there's plans for a kiosk to be created so that people will be able to look up those past memorials. So we'll have a lot of work through design development to figure out exactly what is going to be coming and where.
Can I go back just for a second to the process of the reviews and the work sessions leading up to the site plan approval that's anticipated for April? Is that these work sessions are really great, but it would be good to have one that is just solely dedicated to the work session and not kind of tacked on to the end of an agenda. Because I think it makes it really hard on everybody to bring everything to the table about what, the 2 slides that are applicable to their group that they're seeing in a great presentation. That's kind of an overall kind of 50,000 foot view.
Yeah, I'm on many of these site plans. They go through numerous work sessions. This is, as we sort of highlighted here, the preliminary one, the overall perspective. I don't even know what percent complete on this design you would say you are. I mean, I know you're well in the process. You expect on submitting something over the next month. Is this 95% or?
We just finished schematic design. So in the discussions that we've had with the city, we're targeting to submit for site plan submission basically mid-December. And then the discussion was that sometime in early January, we'd start doing those more individualized conversations with each of the different commissions. That would allow us to have those meetings in January. Any feedback that we need to have, we can then review, incorporate, come back. And that's where the not looking for approval to April gives us a lot of that dialogue that needs to happen. And then at the same time, from an overall design perspective, we're going to be starting design development within the next 2 to 4 weeks. And so design development we're scheduled to be done early March, just so overlapping schedules.
Yeah, the objective here was not to, you get 2 minutes and your input's done, not at all. And it sounds like the design build team is willing to meet with each group individually, and I guess at some point it gets sent out to first reading and it goes through that whole process, or no? For something like this, because it's a public civic building, or no?
No, it's
just gonna be
the same
straight.
site plan process.
Okay.
It's just, it's good we have 5 months built in rather than a typical 3, so.
Okay.
This doesn't have the two-step process that's going to apply to the 10 acres?
Yeah, what's gonna happen with that is, they're gonna, they've already described phase one's gonna cover basically constructing the new high school. And so phase two would be an amended site plan. So it would come back in a full site plan process, that amendment, but it'd be for a smaller portion of it. Because it's just unknown at this time, and so they need to move forward, and then the unknown will be known, and then it'll be an amendment. And if for some reason, the timing works that we can, do that amendment in some concurrent way, fine. If not, it'll just be post-site plan.
From a timing perspective, what we've proposed, because I think that was one of the earlier questions too, for that second submission. So now that the letter of intent is out and we can have conversations, what we've scheduled is basically a 4 to 6 week period for us to do some initial discovery with the development team and try to understand what the ramifications might be specifically with that trapezoidal area. Then we're not going to do anything for a couple months because there's the due diligence phase that the developer will be going through for the things they need to do to meet the city requirements. We then will next March, once the letters are signed and everything is looking good, we then will come back together with the development team, do a different level of coordination, not only for site planning, but also for utility coordination, parking, all those kinds of things. Throughout this early spring into early summer, we'll then do the detailed design information, and our goal is to resubmit for the amendment in the fall of next year. So I think September is what we're proposing. So it's kind of a little ways out, but we felt that that was really important to allow the development the time that they need to do stuff. And because we've isolated ourselves from impacting the start of construction, that really allows us to have the right planning time to make sure we're all making the right decisions for everyone.
Okay. In terms of the green space, what percentage of the site is green space, and how are we measuring that when you have so many athletic fields? Is it just take it all and say that's green, and it's a small or the building's a small portion of that, or how we the reason I ask is if we're reducing the green space in the parking lots, I want to understand those numbers and the trade-offs that would have to be made.
That's a great question, and we were actually trying to figure it out ourselves. But I think we will need some coordination with you guys. We've been looking at Fairfax County's way of counting, so they'll deduct the athletic fields, obviously, because you're not gonna have trees anyways, and a bunch of different things for this. So we've been starting to follow that, but if the Tree Commission or Urban Forestry has another way to calculate it, we certainly are interested. I mean, we've made some assumptions to calculate our RFDP submission at, I think it was at like 21%, whatever it was, but I think that if you guys have a specific way we need to calculate it, then let's work together on that.
Thank you. Okay. Did we cover sustainability at all? I mean, we touched a lot of different things. I feel like we've hit the architecture, circulation, trees, process already. Did sustainability happen? Did whoever had a question about that, was that asked?
We just had one question about the roof. Plans for roofing coverage?
There are some areas of vegetative roofing, and the rest of it will basically be a white coating complying with the LEED requirement for heat island effect.
And potentially PV.
Yeah, and it's being sized for future PV as part of the net zero readiness.
So a lot of the normal equipment is going to go inside the
Yeah, there's very little rooftop equipment here, so if you look at the floor plans, substantial space has been allocated to accommodate that mechanical equipment interior. In order to meet the net zero requirements, it does require a substantial amount of PV, so we're trying to leave the roof as free as possible for that.
So how does that work then? I saw that chart, that your step-down chart. The PV, that's just on the responsibility of the city. That's our own. How do we get that green bar? I don't really understand that process and who's responsible for it. That's just us?
That's being managed by Falls Church City Public Schools, is looking at that process and looking at a potential power purchase agreement. I think Mr. Stevens
we
would
would
really
probably use a power purchase agreement. So that's just a financing arrangement, so we don't have to pay for the panels up front.
Sure.
So we're going to issue an RFI to collect information about that, and then decisions will be made at some point in the future.
Okay, so you're getting us to that blue with the little red on top.
Right.
The 25-ish range, or
No, we-
20,
yeah.
a little over 20. Yeah,
That's the 22 number that I.
22.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we're taking care of the rest, I guess. That's what I understand now. All right, let's move to parking. I suspect there's questions about the parking. We just touched about the
Where am I gonna
block of
park?
trees.
Yeah, where's everybody gonna park? I guess, you know, I understand you were talking about the non-simultaneous, but on the zone-in chart that you gave us in, one of our packet materials, so you listed all of the, I don't know if you guys have that slide too. Just like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, we had one, it was like slide 3 of what you gave us. Which, oh, there you go. So, cause you were talking about down here, the event gymnasium, you know, 1 for 4 seats, that's $375. We know we have $398 on the space once we both have both sides. But I think the problem is that if that event gymnasium, let's suppose it's some kind of basketball game or a regional basketball game, a tournament, there's no way there's not other stuff happening on that campus. So I understand that you can't fit any more spots on this campus, but I definitely think, I mean, it's not adequate for what we're gonna have happen at this high school. And the reason is, it's not so much that people in the city could probably find another way to come here, but if we have an event, people are gonna be driving in. We compete against some schools that are hour and a half away from here. There's no way they're not driving in. And it's actually happens now where they drive in for our football games and they literally can't park. Because there's a football game going on, something in
You ever
MH or
notice the
something.
giant parking lot next door?
Well,
$4.
yeah, you can get,
You get towed.
oh,
Pay your full
no,
bucks?
he's talking about
Oh, the
using
bus
the,
is-
he's talking about using the grad center. I think
Okay.
the problem
Oh,
with the
that.
grad center is, it's not intuitive how you
I
get there.
understand. Yep.
Because
So
it's
put up a
not,
couple
it's blocked from our site. You can see it, but you don't, people don't know how to get there.
I think this
there
is,
any access to any of those, there's no access proposed to any of those sites?
No.
Look,
Not right now, but
There's no
if they
permission
happen to happen, if their development happens to happen while we're still involved, certainly that coordination.
Yeah.
I think this is a reasonable question for sure. It's why it's on the list. I think there's more to be determined as in the long term, there's a enormous development coming.
Right.
It's going to provide a lot of parking. There's some discussions about availability for this overflow
Yeah.
issue. There's so many details to work out, whether that's free, whether that's charged, the hours. There's the Virginia Tech site that we talked about. This is legit, and there's so many people who are concerned about it. I just don't expect us to have answers
No,
this
I
evening to that.
don't expect that. I just think that we cannot assume that the development on our 10 acres is gonna help us, because there's gonna be a lot of residential there. Where we need parking the most is actually in the evening. And so if it was all offices, we'd be golden, because we could share and they'd be gone at night and we'd use it at night, but it's gonna be a lot of residential, so there isn't going to be.
But there is a
that
significant portion that is
There is
commercial.
some
There'll be spots
commercial.
available.
There may be, but it's mostly residential, so that doesn't, you're right, there might be some sharing.
I think
We'll see
our
what
point
happens.
with the non-simultaneous is that we're not asked to add 375 to 400 to create 775.
Right.
And that the number is something, maybe not in between, but something more reasonable. I think that's what we're saying.
Yeah, I understand. That's where I got in that, because I saw that and I was like, there's no way if something's going on in the evening, there will be simultaneous use.
I
Yeah.
do think the question that came up earlier about interparcel connectivity is an important one, that I think this is an area that developed with a limited road network. And the level of security and fencing around the site actually makes it very difficult to get from one to the other without going all the way back out to the main street, take Act 7. So that might be something worth exploring during the site planning process, that if something happened at Virginia Tech, depending on what the status of the conversation is at the 10-acre site, or if WMATA is in process of their comp plan amendment, what would be the best connections to make at the high school site to the secured entrances?
Well, and also maybe the security level at night could be different. So right now, MEH has a gate that they can shut when they don't want traffic coming through, and maybe there could be some entrances that could be like ungated in the evening where security issues might be a little bit lessened. Because it's like any other sports arena area in the city, I mean, or in this area, you have to be able to get to it somehow.
Well, I'm just thinking if the concern is a shortage of parking spaces, there's a metro parking structure immediately adjacent to the site, but I think if it 50% or less occupancy,
Yeah.
even during the day.
But
But-
they're charging us for using it.
Well, no, the real issue is how do you get from there, to the gym? And I think that's gonna be hard. You have to walk all the way out of that site and get to Haycock and know how to come down and go over. And I
Right.
think it's not intuitive right now. We can't even get people to figure out how to use Kaiser, and it's right across the street from the State Theater. So,
Right, but that's something to work on, but it's not, doesn't
Yeah.
have much to do with the design.
no,
of
it
the
doesn't,
site.
you're right.
Yeah, I think the
But connectivity is an issue.
the neighboring developer is beginning to think about those issues. They want people to have access to the metro.
Right.
And are doing what they can to
That
help
would be the
help
best
facilitate
for all
it.
of us.
Were there other questions on parking?
Just at some point, you address why you shooting for lower standards than the argument. You now, but that's.
He does not want to be recorded.
You're referencing the bike parking standards?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a question. I think the emphasis that we've listed the minimum standards for both the Arlington and the lead, and now our job is to see where we can get to based on our site plan and the room that we have. The Arlington standards, it's pretty robust, especially if we're going up to the 1,500 for the maximum, and that's a lot of bikes.
We
And
just had a conversation too about concerns about automobile parking, so it seems
Absolutely.
like they're related conversations.
no, absolutely. So our team is going to try their best to get as much as possible, and we'll come back to you guys in terms of where we're at.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an important element. I mean, there's lots of moving parts on this, but I think what we're trying to do as a city, and it's consistent with all of, like, many objectives, and personally important to me, that the bike parking is adequate, and more than adequate, closer to the Arlington standard than to the lead standard.
Yeah, and the lead standard seems tough because of the proximity to the door, which, like, clearly more than half the students getting off the bus are going to walk farther than that to the door. So hopefully the fact that some of the bicycle parking may not help us with lead won't deter us from doing it
Right,
anyway.
right.
you know.
And this is a perfect example of why we want to come to you guys early, so that we can take your temperature on some of these things, and we can go back to do some work, basically.
That one's a big one.
Yeah.
The accessibility, but you mentioned the bike access road on.
Along the
Haycock.
far right side,
It
yeah.
wasn't clear to me how the bike circulation.
It will be more clear in the next few months, once we talk with the developer, because our whole, let me get there. Our whole concept is, there you go, is that we're divorcing the bike from the vehicular traffic by putting it where it is. Now, if that trapezoid has something else, like a structure, we're going to work with those entities to make sure that an adequate and safe bike path does exist from the established bike routes that Falls Church is using to our site.
So right now it seems like a secondary.
Well, there's actually thought behind it because we have the buses and the vehicles along the diagonal road. We wanted to divorce that. And there's nothing really to the left, right? Because everybody's coming from the right. So we put it at the very far right, actually closer to all of the constituents, the students. So it's not a random thought to the edge, although it seems like it because it is pushed off and it's part of phase 2, but it's really not. So what Jonathan had showed in the precedent is that this is really nice bike path that exists. Perhaps there's trees along it that is between the proposed parking lot in this case and whatever the developer's edge is. Of course, there's coordination involved in that.
That actually, that facility is going to be very valuable to the economic development team, for the Hoffman EYA team, that they're going to want to facilitate that themselves.
Is it the expectation based on the green dotted line is that the entrance to that is going to be coming off of 7? Is that what it's doing?
It's also off of Haycock. You can actually see it on the
Oh,
upper part.
okay.
So
Oh, yeah, I see it there. Oh, okay. That was really faded and over the
Yeah.
gray.
Yeah,
So I
so-
kept going, is that not there or there?
No,
Okay,
it's
because our
both.
biggest problem right now is there is a bike path to the bike bridge, and then it goes off to Vienna. And then the kids, really, a lot of kids don't bike
There's no
because
safe-
from there, they're basically coming up the sidewalk or cutting through the giant parking lot. And so, one of the things, I mean, I don't know if it's really your issue, but maybe it's really more the city's issue, but we're gonna have to figure out
To get a good,
a better, safer route from the bike trail up there. And, because currently we don't have any, bike lanes anywhere near there.
Yeah, it's a good point. So for us, like you talked about, we're in charge of what's within our site, and if you take the lead requirements that they have to connect to an established bike route that's published, which you have, or something that is planned within a certain amount of time and funded. So as crazy as it may sound, what you have is Route 7 is an official bike route, and Haycock is an official bike route. So we kind of check mark that. Now, ultimately, what that looks like, obviously, I think that's why that's
It's a
the
little
purpose of the
concerning
question.
to put a middle schooler on Route 7 as it currently exists.
Sure.
So with our grant for that intersection, I know that it's multimodal, and so are we gonna look more clearly on how bike traffic comes through there? Because we do have a grant for that, obviously, so I would hope that that's a big, I know that that was listed in there as one of the things.
15.7 million.
Yeah,
Yeah, there were a couple things considered. So I think the grant you're referencing is the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority grant. It was about $15.5 million an award for multimodal improvements along the exterior of the 10 acres, including a new pedestrian activated signal connecting the site, the 10 acres to the giant shopping center, a rebuild of that intersection of Haycock, Shreve, and Route 7, as well as a new signalized intersection along Route 7. Not to provide access to Chestnut. So that's included, that grant's been awarded. I think as part of that also, city staff has been working with Fairfax County staff to get better access along Shreve Road to the WNOD. Certainly an opportunity to get folks to the 10-acre site, but obviously that also connects them to the school as well. I do think you're right about how do we get a wide enough path to actually accommodate the desire for additional pedestrian and bicycle access.
I
How
wonder-
wide does it have to be? What do the amenities have to be? How far from the main travelways does it have to be?
and maybe, if with Shreve being improved, we need to think about that neighborhood between Shreve and West. Is there a known bike path from that neighborhood through to Shreve, and then maybe they could use the Shreve to come up? As
That's-
another way of going. Anyway, just something to think about as you're looking at it.
Yeah, that's been explored as part of a student study for the Gordon Road Triangle as well as the mini tap. There was the idea of essentially punching through the city's already owned property along the property yard and the site beyond on the south side of Gordon Road. The idea that could be an opportunity to connect to the WNOD there. That obviously you'd have to find another punch point on the south side of that, but you could continue to make these connections. And ultimately, right, part of the problem here is the lack of a street grid or a connected street grid. And so pushing through more interparcel access, as we were talking about earlier, is the key to making pedestrian and bikeability work.
Thank you. That's mine.
You're on the list. Hold on,
Okay.
you're on the list.
Quick
Once
suggestion, you got the parking lot here. Put another ticketed entryway to the playing field, right up there, so they don't have to go all the way around there. Just a suggestion.
So there's access.
I know there's access there,
Where are you putting?
right there,
Right.
Yeah, where your
Right
hand
there.
is, basically, because she's saying they're gonna come from those lots up there.
right up there.
That's what the school could.
On Mustang's Way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it needs to be coordinated with the school.
Yeah.
Well,
How they want to
It might be
set.
that ticket in for outdoor events is maybe different than indoor or something.
No,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
outdoor. And then, please, if at all possible, if we don't get the lights up on the multi-use, at least do the underground work.
Yes.
Same for EV charging, someone with some conduit, or at least, anticipate that?
We're waiting for some direction from the school regarding the EV charging stations, because that does require us knowing exactly where they would need to go. Because unfortunately, those are sort of counterintuitive to providing a net zero ready building. They're kind of energy suckers, so there's a balance there to understand how many might be proposed for the site.
To the question about the ticketing and the gates, I'm not sure I understood when it was shown first. If there's a ticketed event happening at the football field, would there still be public access to the multi-use space or the tennis courts at the same time?
Yeah, because that's not ticketed.
I think that those details are some of the things that we'll have to go through with the schools to figure out exactly how they want to operate. It may not be so different to what they do now, because they do filter everybody to that one point where the kiosk is.
But that's with the whole parking lot that's over there now, and that's where everybody parks and just goes there. But with this parking lot there, you need to get up through there. That's all I'm saying.
Sure. But if you ungrade the phase 2 part of it, there is a substantial parking lot or structure there as well. So that's kind of our rationale. In our front of the school, our monumental entrance, as you see from the renderings before, it is that corner. So that's where we want to invite people. So
I know exactly.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is from the comp plan, the Parks for People chapter, the comp plan talks about this as a shared community facility. So will there still be open public access to the other fields, even if 1 or 2 or 3 of them is ticketed for a particular event or set of events?
I think the fine details are up to the school, but they certainly have the ability to.
Right.
There's multiple ways to get
Parks
it.
and Rec and.
Yeah.
Well, they do it now, so they can
Yeah.
figure out how to do it
Yeah.
in the future. But
I'll talk with the Boosters Club.
Lindy, are those, you got your 3? I only heard 2 questions.
Well, I know, we talked about the memorial space.
Okay.
That is very dear to my heart. And I know that we've got we've had a lot of study done on it, so we're cool.
so she's cut off now.
Okay. I feel like we've addressed phase 2 sort of indirectly, other than mostly just to say it's coming. I don't know what, I forget how it got on the list in terms of someone having a specific question about phase 2. I feel like I've checked every other topic, but
It just seemed like a pretty big variable
Yep.
out there, but now, from what I understand, probably time to go home and do a little homework and read up on what has transpired in the last couple of hours.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, then we covered it all.
I have like a 10-second question related to fields. The current site has 4 tennis courts. This has 6. Current site has 2 basketball courts for the middle schoolers. This has 0. I'm sure somebody has made this decision. We don't have to talk about it, but you could lose a couple tennis courts, put up some basketball courts.
They have talked about that.
Just throwing that out there.
And the response?
I assume the schools will figure that out, but
These are, the decision has officially been made to go with tennis over basketball?
Yeah, I think it sounds like they need to discuss how they're gonna do recess in middle school.
guess is that there's some
Provide them with something.
requirement for 6 courts to qualify as some.
I see. Okay, it's 11:15, so while I'm sure we have other questions, let's adjourn. Thank you very much for the presentation. It looks really wonderful. I mean, we have some details, obviously, that people have questions about, and the community is going to want to weigh in. But overall, it looks spectacular. It looks like an unbelievable facility for the students. We just dealt with the external stuff and the things there, but even from those pieces, it looks like a really wonderful environment for learning and really a lot of thought going into the programming and how the flow is going to work for the students. So I appreciate all the work you've done so far. I think it's an unbelievably good foundation for what will be just smaller refinements. And all those extra bike parking spaces you're going to add. So thank you again, and thank you again for the Tree Commission and the Architectural Advisory Board. Yeah. All right. We are adjourned then.